Chapter 520. Competition. The instant Zhuowen moved, all the leaders on the platform focused their gazes on Zhuowen's dot of light. Everyone knew that if Zhuowen advanced another 50 steps, he would be on par with Tao. After all, Tao was still on the 9,500th step. Zhuowen moved again. I never thought that he would still be able to climb up after reaching the 9,000th step. This is truly inconceivable. Lu Nanxian's expression finally changed. Zhuowen's current performance had truly shocked him. It must be known that the pressure after the 9,000th step was truly terrifying. Even Tao was somewhat unable to withstand the pressure. Look, how is this Zhuowen's speed so fast? He passed 5 or 6 steps in the blink of an eye. What's going on? Suddenly, there was a burst of noise on the platform, and a surprised voice reverberated throughout the platform. What? After the 9,000th step, this Zhuowen still has this kind of speed? He passed 5 or 6 steps in the blink of an eye? Hearing those words, Lu Nanxian's pupils shrank. His gaze immediately focused on Zhuowen's dot of light. When he saw that the golden dot of light on the golden tower was indeed rapidly ascending, Lu Nanxian's pupils shrank again and again. It's actually so fast. Just how did this Zhuowen do it? Lu Nanxian's entire body trembled. His eyes bulged out of their sockets as he couldn't help but tremble as he spoke. If Zhuowen had reached this kind of speed when he was 2,000 or 3,000 steps, Lu Nanxian wouldn't be surprised. However, this Zhuowen had actually reached this kind of speed after the 9,000th step. Lu Nanxian couldn't help but be shocked. After the 9,000th step, the pressure in the Zhongling mountain would reach a qualitative change. The pressure was so great that it was as if countless mountains were pressing down on one's spine. It was simply difficult to move forward. Even the extremely powerful Tao's speed would be extremely slow after the 9,000th step. After the 9,000th step, this Zhuowen was actually able to reach a terrifying speed of 5 or 6 steps in an instant. Lu Nanxian's first reaction was that this was impossible. However, this kind of impossible reality had truly appeared in front of his eyes. All the leaders on the platform had the same expression as Lu Nanxian. It was even more exaggerated than Lu Nanxian's. They naturally knew how terrifying the pressure after the 9,000th step of the Zhongling mountain was. They simply couldn't understand how Zhuowen was still able to reach this speed. Zhuowen has already reached 9,200 steps. He's only 300 steps away from Tao. Could it be that Tao hasn't noticed? It's still at the 9,500th step. I'm afraid that Tao was careless. The 9,500th step is already extremely close to the peak of the Zhongling mountain. With Tao's arrogance, I'm afraid that from the beginning to the end, he didn't put Zhuowen in his eyes. That's why he didn't even look at the identity token. If Tao still doesn't look at it, I'm afraid that the first place will really be taken away by this Zhuowen. Everyone on the platform stared at the constantly rising light spot on the golden tower. They could feel that the hearts in their chests were constantly beating up and down along with the rising light spot. Everyone's heart was in their throats at this moment. They knew that the first place was now full of suspense. Whether it was Zhuowen or Tao, both of them had the qualifications to compete for the first place. Even Nanxian felt uneasy at this moment. Tao was the #1 genius of the house of Marquis Qin. He naturally hoped that the first place would be taken by Tao. However, Zhuowen's current performance was too strong. After reaching the 9,000th step, his speed could still reach such a terrifying level. It was really difficult for Tao to take the first place. Just as all the masters of the forces on the platform at the top of the mountain were looking forward to the first place, in the huge square outside the Zhongling mountain on the 3rd floor of the Vitality Tower, many genius warriors who had withdrawn from the Zhongling mountain were looking at the huge Zhongling mountain in front of them in shock. Roar! Roar! The beastly roars that were like monstrous waves resounded throughout the entire Zhongling mountain at this moment. It was as if all the beasts that had been slumbering in the Zhongling mountain had awakened. The entire Zhongling mountain was trembling. The strong vibrations almost affected the standing square. Even some of the weaker warriors couldn't stand stably under the vibrations and were in a sorry state. What's wrong with the Zhongling Mountain? What the hell is going on? Puzzled expressions spread across the faces of all the geniuses. The sudden tremors of the Zhongling Mountain made them feel puzzled and confused. Xu Tianliang frowned. This wasn't the first time that the Zhongling Mountain had trembled. Before they had withdrawn from the Zhongling Mountain had already trembled once. At that time, they didn't care. But now, the Zhongling Mountain was trembling again. Moreover, the intensity of the tremors was much stronger than the previous time. Xu Tianliang already suspected that the abnormality of the Zhongling Mountain was related to someone in the Zhongling Mountain. This has never happened to the Zhongling Mountain in the past, but it has happened twice this time. I'm afraid that this abnormality is related to someone. Luo Xing, who had been silent, suddenly said. When Xu Tianliang, Zhu Kai, and Qin Batian heard this, they all nodded in agreement. After all, they were the super geniuses of the 5 super forces. They knew much more about the Zhongling Mountain, which stood on the 3rd floor of the Yuan Qi Tower, than the average person. If there was no external influence, it was impossible for any abnormalities to happen in Zhongling Mountain. However, it happened now, and it happened twice in a row. This abnormality could only be man-made, and it should be related to someone in Zhongling Mountain. Only Zhuowen and Elviatao are left in the Zhongling Mountain. If the abnormality of the Zhongling Mountain is related to someone, then would it be Zhuowen or Elviatao? Qin Batian scratched his head and said in a rough voice. Brother Qin, you think too highly of Zhuowen, don't you think? If it's related to someone, then it can only be Brother Elviatao. After all, Brother LV is the #1 genius of the House of Marquis Qin. He is also the person who has the hope of reaching the peak of the Zhongling Mountain. Do you think that bastard Zhuowen can be compared to Brother LV? Xu Tianliang suddenly sneered. The abnormality of the Zhongling Mountain had indeed surprised him, but he was very clear about Zhuowen's strength. How could he cause such a commotion in the Zhongling Mountain? Hearing this, Qin Batian and Zhu Kai both nodded. Although Zhuowen's results in the Zhongling Mountain were not bad, the gap between him and Elviatao was too big. The only one who could cause such a commotion in the Zhongling Mountain was Elviatao. However, Luo Xing frowned. She faintly felt that the abnormality in the Zhongling Mountain had something to do with Zhuowen. This was because when the Zhongling Mountain first shook, all the warriors in the Zhongling Mountain stopped in their tracks. Even Elviatao was no exception. However, there was one person who did not stop. Instead, he quickly climbed up the mountain. That person was Zhuowen. At that time, Luo Xing faintly felt that the shaking of the Zhongling Mountain might have something to do with Zhuowen. However, this idea was unrealistic, so she did not take it to heart. However, now that the Zhongling Mountain was shaking even more violently, Luo Xing began to suspect that the shaking of the Zhongling Mountain was related to Zhuowen and not Elviatao. I feel that the abnormality in the Zhongling Mountain should be caused by Zhuowen. Luo Xing suddenly said coldly as she gently stroked the hair in front of her forehead. When Luo Xing's words came out, Qin Batian, Xu Tianliang, and Zhu Kai suddenly became silent. Soon after, their gazes converged on Luo Xing. The expressions of the 3 people became extremely strange. It seems that the #1 genius of our Jade Lady Star Court, the #1 beauty of the province, Luo Xing, seems to be interested in Zhuowen. The matter is already so obvious, yet you are still siding with Zhuowen? Xu Tianliang suddenly said in a strange tone. Zhu Kai coldly stared at Luo Xing. Originally, he did not have a good impression of Luo Xing. At this time, he naturally would not give the latter a good face. However, Qin Batian simply smiled and said, Sister Luo Xing, although that Zhuowen is not bad, the gap between him and Elviatao is too huge. How could he have the ability to cause the Zhongling Mountain to shake so violently? That's right. Brother LV has already reached the 9,500th step. As for that Zhuowen, he has long been left behind by Brother LV. How could this child have such an ability? If you don't believe me, you can take a look at Zhuowen's current position. The corners of Xu Tianliang's mouth were filled with a cold smile. He took out the identity token from his bosom, intending to find out Zhuowen's current position to refute Luo Xing's point of view. However, When Xu Tianliang's gaze converged on the second light spot on the identity token, his pupils instantly shrank to the size of needles. His entire person seemed to be frozen in place. "Brother Xu, what's wrong with you? Didn't you see the identity token? Then where is Zhuowen? I'm afraid that he has been left behind by Brother LV." Zhu Kai and Qin Batian also discovered Xu Tianliang's strange state. They hurriedly came to Xu Tianliang's side and their gazes landed on the second light spot. Immediately, their bodies trembled and they actually froze in place. Their eyes seemed to protrude from their sockets as they stared straight at the identity token in Xu Tianliang's hand. The trio's faces were filled with a rich mix of disbelief, shock, and disbelief. It could be said that it was extremely rich and colorful. Luo Xing also discovered the trio's strange state. Her long, shapely eyebrows slightly furrowed as she curiously took out her own identity token. However, when her gaze converged on the light spot on the identity token, her delicate body involuntarily trembled as her pretty face was filled with disbelief. This was because the first and second light spots on the identity token were actually extremely close to each other. Evidently, the difference between the first and second place was not that great. At the same time, a hubbub of noise rose from the entire square at this moment. Everyone had already noticed the two light spots that were extremely close to each other on the identity token. In an instant, the noise soared to the sky and reverberated around the entire square. The reason for all of this was because of the two remaining lines of information on the identity token. First place, LV Atao, 9,500th step. Chapter 521. LV Atao's nervousness and uproar like a monstrous wave boiled up in the empty square. Every genius martial artist in the square stared blankly at the information displayed on the identity token in their hands. 9,300 steps. When did Zhuowen reach the 9,300 steps? Isn't this too fast? Look. That Zhuowen's speed is very fast. He's actually closing in on LV Atao at the 9,500 steps. Didn't LV Atao notice that Zhuowen is closing in on him? If he doesn't notice it, I'm afraid he'll really catch up. Everyone's gaze was focused on the light spot on the identity token, especially the light spot that was closing in on LV Atao. Everyone was sweating for LV Atao. Clang! Xu Tianliang's right hand shook, and the identity token in his palm suddenly fell to the ground. His gloomy face was full of disbelief. He never thought that Zhuowen would also reach above 9,000 steps, and was constantly shortening the distance between him and LV Atao, who was in first place. This, Zhu Kai and Qin Batian also opened their mouths slightly. They didn't know what to say. They just stood there in a daze. Where did Zhuowen come from? How can a genius from a low-level city achieve such an unbelievable level? Luo Xing's beautiful eyes were filled with complexity. She increasingly found that the slightly thin youth gave her a mysterious and unfathomable feeling. Every time this child did something, it would always make her inexplicably shocked and even shocked the world. Boom! 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 The huge Zhongling mountain was like an enraged primordial beast at this moment. It violently rolled and shook, like a lone boat in the sea that could capsize at any time. On the 9,500 steps, LV Atao, who was sitting cross-legged, had a pair of sword-like eyebrows tightly knitted. He stared at Zhongling Mountain in front of him with a solemn expression. Zhongling Mountain is starting to shake again. What's going on? What's going on at Zhongling Mountain? LV Atao remembered very clearly that on the third day he entered Zhongling Mountain, there had been a similar tremor. However, the tremor this time was even more intense than the last time. It was as if the entire mountain was about to collapse. Zhongling Mountain wouldn't shake for no reason. Could it be related to that Zhuowen? That Zhuowen's potential is indeed not bad, but it shouldn't be enough to cause such an abnormality in Zhonglingshan. Feeling the violent shaking of Zhongling Mountain, LV Atao suddenly felt uneasy. This feeling made him feel suffocated, as if something had been taken away from him. After hesitating for a moment, LV Atao slowly took out his identity token. In fact, after entering the 9,000th step, he no longer intended to pay attention to Zhuowen. Although Zhuowen had reached the 5,000th step for the first time last time, there was still a huge gap between them. He didn't believe that Zhuowen would be able to reach the 9,000th step in a short 7 or 8 days. He even thought that Zhuowen might not even be able to reach the 6,000th step. However, Zhongling Mountain shook even more violently, causing Elviatao to have no choice but to look at Zhuowen, who had yet to leave Zhongling Mountain. Although the abnormality of Zhongling Mountain should have nothing to do with Zhuowen, he still wanted to confirm it. Hiss. When Elviatao's gaze finally focused on the identity token, his pupils constricted into needles. He couldn't help but take a deep breath and stand up with a swoosh. This was because the identity token showed that Zhuowen, who was in second place, had already reached the 9,300th step. He was only 200 steps away from him. This Zhuowen, turning his head, Elviatao's gaze pierced through the layers of clouds and shot towards the back of the steps. He seemed to be able to faintly sense that a figure was approaching him at a terrifying speed. Elviatao's expression was unprecedentedly solemn. He had his pride, because in his opinion, no one would be his opponent in this Origin Chi Tower battle. If he wanted to compete, he would compete with himself, with the Lu Hantian of the past. However, all of this pride, at this moment, when he saw the light that represented Zhuowen on the identity token, all of it vanished. Elviatao's proud heart was also shaken at this moment. He couldn't help but be shaken. He couldn't help but be shocked. He stared at the identity token in his hand. Ever since he became sensible, he had never cared so much about a person. Moreover, it was a lowly cultivator from a low-level city. At this moment, Elviatao suddenly recalled the youth's figure that had slowly walked out of the golden door that had descended from the sky in the Mountain of Trials. He had surpassed Qin Batian, Xu Tianliang, Zhu Kai, Luo Xing, and everyone except Elviatao. Now, he was only 200 steps away from him. Such a distance made Elviatao, who had always had an indifferent expression, feel an unprecedented nervousness and throbbing in his heart. Zhuowen, I really didn't expect that you would be able to reach above the 9,000th step. I underestimated you before. You already have the qualifications to be my opponent. However, it may not be so easy to surpass me. Now, let's let everyone see who is the true number one. At this moment, Elviatao's expression became unprecedentedly serious and passionate. He had stood at the peak of the younger generation for far too long. The loneliness of standing at the top was something he had experienced countless times. Now that a freak like Zhuowen had appeared, the surging battle intent hidden in the depths of Elviatao's heart had finally been aroused. Boom! Elviatao finally moved. His foot suddenly stomped on the 9,501st step. Instantly, a terrifying pressure formed into an endless spiral storm, densely crushing Elviatao's body. Elviatao's entire body seemed to have frozen. Break for me. With a low roar, Elviatao's foot stomped on the 9,501st step, and he continued to climb up step by step. His face was filled with determination and pride. Zhuowen, let's have a proper competition now. Step by step, he walked towards the peak of the mountain. Although Elviatao's expression was extremely calm, his heart was not as calm. In fact, he was still far from adjusting his body to its peak condition. He had originally planned to rest for 2 more days before heading towards the peak. However, Zhuowen's powerful arrival had destroyed this plan in his heart. At this moment, Zhuowen's entire body was flickering with golden light. Golden veins were like small snakes that covered his entire body. He had already reached the 950th step. Roar! 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 A deafening roar whistled from behind Zhuowen. The invisible sound wave seemed to have a strange magic power as it spread to every corner of Zhongling Mountain. Looks like the artifact spirit of Zhongling Mountain is determined to bite me and not let me go, right? Feeling the powerful aura chasing closely behind him, and the beast roar that seemed to be close at hand, Zhuowen's eyes revealed a trace of worry. The pressure after the 9,000th step was extremely terrifying. At this moment, Zhuowen had already cultivated the great Nirvana Sun to the entry level. All the acupuncture points in his body had been opened, and his physical strength was extremely powerful. However, under this pressure, he still felt some obstruction. Kid. This artifact spirit seems to be affected after the 9,000th step. Although its speed is faster than you, It's not much faster, so you should hurry up and leave. Xiao Hei's voice suddenly sounded in his mind. Hearing these words, Zhuowen gently sighed. He had thought that the artifact spirit's power behind him would be as fast as last time. Then, it would be a matter of time before he was caught up. Thinking back to when he was chased by the artifact spirit until he was in a sorry state and was now able to deal with it with ease, Zhuowen knew that everything was just an illusion. It was not that the artifact spirit's power had weakened, but that he had become much stronger than before. Let's go. That Elviatao has also moved. I'm afraid that he already knows that I've caught up. Looking at the identity token in his hand, he saw that the light spot that represented Elviatao had finally moved. Zhuowen's eyes revealed a trace of fighting spirit. He did not know if he, who had opened 365 acupuncture points, would be able to defeat the number 1 expert of the younger generation in Muqin County, Elviatao. Elviatao. Then let me see how strong you, the number 1 expert of the younger generation in Muqin County, are. As for the number 1 position, will you be able to keep it? Muttering to himself, Zhuowen's heart was filled with pride. His feet suddenly stomped and immediately, he quickly climbed towards the top of the mountain. He moved. Elviatao finally moved. He must have seen the identity token. He must have also seen Zhuowen, who is closing in on him step by step. It seems that Elviatao has already felt threatened by Zhuowen. Otherwise, it would be impossible for him to change his own pattern and climb the remaining 500 steps. That Zhuowen is indeed abnormal. To be able to catch up with Elviatao, this child's talent is indeed terrifying. At this moment, all the warriors in the square realized that Elviatao's light spot, which had not moved for 5 days, had finally moved. They all knew that Elviatao had most likely discovered that Zhuowen was catching up from behind. Look. That Zhuowen's speed has also increased. I really did not expect that this Zhuowen could still increase his speed. What is his limit? Mother **K, how can this Zhuowen's speed still increase? How deep is his potential? And the moment Elviatao's light spot moved, Zhuowen's light spot, which was in second place, actually sped up once again. Its speed was 20 to 30% faster than before. This speed had already stunned everyone's jaws. This is the final battle. The first place will be decided between Zhuowen and Elviatao. I really don't know who will take first place in the end. At this moment, everyone in the square was nervous. If someone had asked them who would take first place in the past, they would definitely have answered Elviatao without hesitation. However, the result of the first place was now full of suspense. This was because the biggest dark horse of this year's Essence Tower battle had appeared in the Zhongling Mountain test. This person's name was Zhuowen. Above the mountain, clouds lingered. On the thick steps, Zhuowen stood tall, his eyes filled with a rich light. Elviatao. I, Zhuowen, will take first place. Chapter 522. Crazy Demon 9 350 steps. 9,400 steps. 9,450 steps. 9,500 steps. From the 9,350 steps to the 9,500 steps, Zhuowen's speed was extremely fast. In just half an incense stick's worth of time, he had already reached the 9,500 steps. Such speed once again shocked everyone in the square. They could not imagine how Zhuowen could still increase his speed when he had already reached such a high step. The instant Zhuowen stepped onto the 9,500 steps, the entire Zhongling Mountain trembled once again as if it had received an extremely heavy blow. At this moment, Elviatao had only reached the 9,630th step. At this moment, Elviatao's expression was rather miserable. An intense pressure covered the surface of his body, almost causing his body to collapse. Droplets of sweat poured down like rain without any regard for his life. At this moment, Elviatao no longer had the indifferent and elegant expression from before. Between his brows was a dense exhaustion. He was panting, his hair was disheveled, the veins on his forehead were bulging, and the blood in his body was boiling uncontrollably. However, when his gaze gathered on the identity token, his eyes were filled with madness. This was because he discovered that Zhuowen, who was behind him, had unknowingly reached the 9,500th step. There was only a gap of 130 steps between him and himself. Zhuowen! Elviatao suddenly raised his head and roared towards the sky. He lifted his foot and took another step, but his speed was much slower. On the 9,500th step, Zhuowen was also in a rather miserable state. The pressure after the 9,000th step was indeed terrifying. Almost every step could increase the pressure by several times. Even Zhuowen found it difficult to endure. Kid. Just now, you desperately ran for your life and left the artifact spirit far behind. The artifact spirit strength is probably 300 steps away from yours. If you stop at the 9,500th step, you only have 20 breaths of time. Seeing Zhuowen suddenly stop, Xiao He in the Sea of Consciousness naturally knew what Zhuowen was planning. He probably still wanted to absorb the spiritual energy here. Therefore, she very tacitly explained. 20 breaths of time is enough. Muttering to himself, Zhuowen's right hand turned into a claw. Golden light flickered as he slammed it on the steps under his feet. With a rumbling sound, the steps were blasted into fine powder. Waves of dense blue mist-like spirit chi gushed out like a geyser. Zhuowen didn't hesitate and directly absorbed all the spirit chi that leaked out from the bottom of the steps into his body. As the 360 acupoints in his body had already been opened, Zhuowen did not direct all of the spiritual energy into his Niwen palace. Instead, he divided the spiritual energy into two parts. One part was used to replenish the mental energy that he had expended in his Niwen palace, while the other part was used to replenish the physical energy that he had expended. The dense Ling Qi flowed into his body like rivers flowing into the sea. Instantly, an indescribable feeling of comfort spread throughout Zhuowen's body, causing Zhuowen to involuntarily let out a loud roar. With the continuous replenishment of the spirit qi, Zhuowen's fatigue gradually faded away and was replaced by an abundance of energy. 10 breaths of time passed in the blink of an eye. At this moment, the weapon spirit behind him was only about 150 steps away from Zhuowen. With the replenishment of the spirit qi, Zhuowen's mental energy had also reached its peak. Perhaps the weapon spirit behind him had sensed that Zhuowen was once again unscrupulously absorbing spiritual qi, as furious roars continued to surge from behind him. The emotions within the roars seemed to want to tear Zhuowen into pieces. Kid. Hurry up and leave. The weapon spirit is very angry now and is already increasing its speed. If you don't leave now, it will really catch up to you. Xiao Hei's face suddenly changed as she spoke. Hearing this, Zhuowen looked at the spirit qi that was still gushing out from under his feet with some pity. The spirit qi at the bottom of the steps was extremely abundant. However, with the weapon spirit chasing after him, Zhuowen really didn't dare to stay here any longer. What a pity for the remaining spirit qi. With a light sigh, Zhuowen stomped his feet and his speed increased by a large margin. With the replenishment of the spirit qi, Zhuowen's mental energy was almost undamaged and reached its peak state. Therefore, he could still barely maintain his speed. By the time Zhuowen set off, Elviatao had already reached the 9,700th step. At this moment, Elviatao's eyes were scarlet red, and his pupils were bloodshot. There was even a trace of blood flowing out from the corner of his mouth. 9,700th step. I really didn't expect the pressure here to have reached such a terrifying level. I wonder where Zhuowen is. Barely suppressing the boiling blood in his body, Elviatao once again placed his gaze on the identity token. This was the first time he cared so much about an opponent. The moment Zhuowen caught up, he knew that he had no choice but to pay attention to Zhuowen. This was the first time in history that he felt threatened by a young genius. Still at the 9,500th step. Looks like he can't hold on anymore. After all, the pressure here can't be compared to the other steps. When Elviatao discovered that the light spot representing Zhuowen in the identity token was still at the 9,500th step, a relaxed smile appeared on the corner of his mouth. This was the joy of defeating a strong opponent. However, the smile on Elviatao's face didn't last for long because he discovered that the light spot representing Zhuowen on the 9,500th step suddenly moved. Moreover, its speed was so fast that it was unbelievable. 9,510 steps. 9,520 steps. 9,530 steps. 9,540 steps. 9,550 steps. In 10 breaths of time, Zhuowen had consecutively crossed 50 steps, from the 9,500th step to the 9,550 step. Moreover, this speed was still slowly increasing, and the distance between them was shrinking at a speed visible to the naked eye. How is this possible? How could Zhuowen's speed be so fast? No, I can't let him surpass me. Elvia Tao roared loudly. His eyes were crimson red as he suddenly stomped on the 9,701st step. He couldn't let Zhuowen surpass him. He was the #1 genius of the younger generation in Muqin County, and his pride wouldn't allow him to fail. Boom. Boom. Unfortunately, the pressure of the 9,700th step had already reached an extremely terrifying level. The instant Elvia Tao's foot stepped on it, the pressure formed a violent cyclone that suddenly acted on Elvia Tao's entire body. Fart. Elvia Tao's face flushed red, and a mouthful of cherry-red blood immediately spurted out. Elvia Tao's body was on the verge of collapse, as if it would collapse at any moment. I refuse to accept this. Zhuowen, first place is mine, Elvia Tao's, not yours. Elvia Tao's eyes were filled with dense madness as he roared towards the sky. He clapped his hands together and suddenly slammed them on his chest. Instantly, the white robe on his body shattered into powder under the powerful force, revealing his robust body. On Elvia Tao's chest, countless blood-red meridians gathered at the center of his chest, drawing a blood-red pattern in the center. It was a huge beast claw, a blood-red beast claw, and the smell of blood constantly spread out. This claw was a totem. It wasn't bright red in color, but a strange dark red. At this moment, Elvia Tao didn't hesitate to slam his palm on the totem on his chest. The bloodhorn immediately emitted a dense blood-red light, as if it had melted and merged with Elvia Tao's body. Elvia Tao's eyes became a strange dark red, and a terrifying aura burst out from his body. It was as if there was a primordial beast hidden in Elvia Tao's body that was gradually awakening. Boom. 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 Elvia Tao seemed to have obtained new strength. He roared towards the sky and took a step forward, his speed almost reaching the limit. 9,750 steps. 9,800 steps. 9,850 steps. 9,900 steps. 9,950 steps. 9,950 steps. 9,950 steps. When Elvia Tao reached 9,950 steps, the blood claw totem on his chest gradually dimmed and finally became transparent. If one didn't look carefully, they wouldn't be able to notice this blood claw. Obviously, this bloodhorn totem was another force that was forcibly sealed in Elvia Tao's body. It was probably Elvia Tao's trump card. However, Elvia Tao was fighting with his life on the line, so he forcefully undid the bloodhorn seal and obtained additional strength. Pucci. Zhuowen. You can be proud that you forced me to use the blood essence that LV Hantian obtained from the blood demon's inheritance. This blood essence is my life-saving method. If it wasn't for the fact that my life was at stake, I would never use it. However, today, I used it for you. Even if you lose to me, you will have no regrets. At this moment, his expression was extremely dim. Forcefully using the power of the bloodhorn totem caused the strength in his body to be severely insufficient. He knew that with his current condition, it was likely that he wouldn't be able to reach the peak of Zhongling Mountain. Slightly panting, Elvia Tao lowered his head to look at the identity token in his hand. This glance immediately caused Elvia Tao's eyes to widen, and his face was filled with disbelief. This is impossible. How can this be? He saw that the light spot that represented Zhuowen on the token had actually soared along with him. Moreover, its speed was slightly faster than before. 9,700 steps. 9,800 steps. 9,850 steps. 9,900 steps. 9,930 steps. Under Elvia Tao's dumbfounded gaze, Zhuowen's level soared straight up to 9,930. At this moment, he was only 20 levels away from Elvia Tao, and in the identity token, The light dots that represented the two of them were almost touching at this moment. This is impossible. Elviatao's eyes were filled with shock and disbelief as he continuously muttered. Elviatao's gaze contained a trace of madness and viciousness. Elviatao once again raised his hand and fiercely slapped the blood claw totem on his chest. A mouthful of fresh blood violently spurted out, and a terrifying blood mist erupted from Elviatao's body. In an instant, a sea of blood surged around Elviatao. Blood light filled the air, and a terrifying pungent smell of blood spread across the entire stage. Zhuowen, the first place belongs to me, Elviatao, and not you, Zhuowen. If you want to snatch the first place, then show me some real ability. Chapter 523. The last light spot in Zhongling Mountain, the battle between Zhuowen and Elviatao had reached its climax. Regardless of whether it was Zhuowen or Elviatao, both of them had given their all in order to fight for the first place in Zhongling Mountain, as well as the right to ascend to the summit. They all knew that only the first place had the right to ascend to the summit of Zhongling Mountain. At this moment, regardless of whether it was the leaders of the various forces on the platform or the countless genius warriors in the square, all of them were silent. They held their breaths as their gazes were fixed on the light spots that were almost stuck together. Although most of them did not know what was going on between Zhuowen and Elviatao in Zhongling Mountain, they knew that the battle between Zhuowen and Elviatao had reached its climax. They all knew that the winner of the first place would be known very soon. Especially when they saw that the light spots that represented Zhuowen and Elviatao were chasing after each other and approaching each other, everyone's emotions reached a high point. A fierce battle between dragons and tigers. This is a true fierce battle between dragons and tigers. Elviatao went from the 9,700th step to the 9,950th step. His speed soared to the extreme at that moment. It could be said that he was so fast that it was dazzling. However, that Zhuowen is not bad either. He actually closed in step by step and did not give in at all. That's right. Elviatao obviously used some kind of secret technique at the end. That's why his speed became so fast. However, even though his speed was so fast, not only did Zhuowen not pull away from him, but he is now only 20 steps away from Elviatao. It's really terrifying. Between them, who will be the first? Sounds of discussion, uproar, and exclamations swept across the entire platform and square like a frenzied storm. Everyone was excited and expectant. They were all looking forward to who would be the first place in the end. On the platform, countless leaders could no longer sit still. They all stood up and stared at the Golden Tower. Zhuowen's miraculous performance had finally moved and shocked all the leaders. At this moment, everyone had forgotten that Zhuowen was only from a low-level city. They only knew that Zhuowen already had the qualifications to compete with Elviatao for first place. Moreover, the possibility of this was extremely high. Is this Zhuowen really just a warrior from a low-level city? What an incredible kid! To be able to force Luitao, the #1 genius of Muqin County, into such a state, Zhuowen's name will shake the entire Muqin County even if he loses. Furthermore, if this Zhuowen is truly able to surpass Elviatao's ranking on Zhongling Mountain, his name will definitely shake the entire Muqin County. At the front of the platform, the 5 leaders, who had extraordinary status and strength, were also shocked. Among them, Lu Nanshan's expression was the most interesting. At this moment, Lu Nanshan's face was filled with undisguised shock. He was really shocked by Zhuowen's performance. As the leader of the House of Marquis Qin, he was very clear about how unfathomable Elviatao's strength was. However, Zhuowen was actually able to force Elviatao into such a state and even had the potential to surpass Elviatao at any time. This Zhuowen must definitely be recruited. The potential of such a genius is not inferior to Elviatao. If this kid is properly trained, he will be another Elviatao. In the Battle of the 9 Counties half a year later, he will also shine brilliantly. After the shock, Lu Nanshan's heart revealed a trace of pleasant surprise. As the leader of Muqin County in name, Lu Nantian placed the overall situation above all else. His breadth of mind was not something that an ordinary person could compare with. Even if Zhuowen were to defeat Elviatao and obtain the first place today, Lu Nantian would not make things difficult for Zhuowen. Instead, he would recruit him into the house of Marquis Qin and properly train him. This kind of genius was exactly what their Muqin county lacked. At this moment, within Zhongling Mountain, clouds were lingering and the mountain was trembling. Terrifying beastly roars continuously sounded throughout the entire Zhongling Mountain. On the 9,930th step, Zhuowen's entire body was trembling. His body that was covered with golden veins gradually began to crack. Streams of golden blood flowed through his body and landed on the steps below his feet. The pressure here was extremely terrifying. It was as if thousands of mountains were pressing down on his body. The extreme pain almost made Zhuowen have the urge to roar towards the sky. However, Zhuowen did not. At this moment, his expression was extremely calm, so calm that it was somewhat terrifying. Although the pain of the terrifying pressure pressing down on his body spread throughout his body, Zhuowen did not groan in pain. What's the point of pain? What's this little bit of pain? I've suffered much more than this. Could it be that I'm afraid of you? Boom. With a low roar, Zhuowen's feet suddenly stepped out and methodically climbed towards the top of the mountain. He knew that he was already very close to Elviatao. He was also extremely close to the top of the mountain. He would not fall down at this moment, nor did he want to fall down. At this moment, Elviatao's hair was disheveled. His expression was malevolent and painful. That crazy and blazing gaze filled Elviatao with a terrifying aura. Every 10 steps, Elviatao would subconsciously look at the identity badge in his palm. Then, he would punch the increasingly dim blood claw totem on his chest, barely supporting him as he continued to move forward. 9,960 steps. 9,970 steps. 9,980 steps. 9,990 steps. When Elviatao reached the 9,990th step, the pressure here had already reached an extremely terrifying level. Even Elviatao couldn't help but kneel on one knee under the pressure of the 9,990th step. Countless wounds appeared on his body as a bloody mist exploded. There are still 10 steps left. As long as I cross the 10th step, I will be able to reach the top of the mountain. And I will be the undisputed number 1. Elviatao suddenly roared. His eyes were filled with madness. His hands formed into fists and fiercely smashed onto his chest. The powerful force caused him to involuntarily spit out a large mouthful of blood. At this moment, the extremely dim blood claw totem on his chest suddenly dissipated. The instant the totem dissipated, waves of terrifying energy finally filled Elviatao's body. This was the last bit of energy from the blood demon's blood essence. At this moment, Elviatao was clearly prepared to go all out. Tap tap tap. Heavy footsteps slowly sounded on the steps. Elviatao was walking very slowly, like an old cow pulling a cart. With heavy steps, he walked step by step towards the final peak of the mountain. 9,991 stair. 9,993 stair. 9,995 stair. 9,997 stair. 9,999 stair. Poochie. In the end, Elviatao's feet stopped at the 9,999 steps. He spat out another mouthful of blood and his expression became much gloomier. At this moment, he knew that he had reached his limit. The last step, the 10,000th step, let's cross it. I want to reach the peak of the mountain. A beast-like roar was emitted from his throat. Elviatao's expression was crazed as he stepped onto the 10,000th step without a care. Immediately, the entire Zhongling mountain trembled and the sky changed color. Boom boom boom. The invisible pressure on the 10,000th step seemed to have substance as it gathered into an invisible mountain that enveloped Elviatao. Poochie. Under this pressure, Elviatao was sent flying without any ability to resist. However, the instant he was sent flying, Elviatao's gaze focused on the peak of the mountain within the hazy clouds. At this moment, he seemed to be able to see the stone statue that stood on the peak of the mountain again. The huge and majestic stone statue seemed to be slowly lowering its head at this moment, silently gazing at Elviatao who was already flying away. What exactly is on the peak of the mountain? What exactly is there? Back then, Elvi Hantien had never seen it. Today, I have also never seen it. A soft sigh slowly sounded out. Tao took out his identity token and gently rubbed it. Instantly, it turned into a pillar of light and disappeared from Zhongling Mountain. He knew that he was unable to reach the peak of the mountain. At this moment, only Zhuowen was left on the entire mountain. The entire Zhongling Mountain seemed to have suddenly become deathly silent the moment Tao left. The square and platform outside Zhongling Mountain also became incomparably silent. When Tao, who was covered in blood, finally appeared on the square, all the genius practitioners on the square had their mouths slightly agape. The atmosphere had become exceptionally strange and silent. No one had expected that Tao would leave Zhongling Mountain before Zhuowen. At this moment, in the huge golden tower, almost everyone's name had become dim. The only light that was still shining was, second, Zhuowen, 9950th step. Everyone was looking forward to the only figure left on Zhongling Mountain. Would this young man named Zhuowen's final result surpass Tao's record and forcefully reach the peak of Zhongling Mountain? At this moment, Tao's expression was gloomy and his brows were filled with exhaustion. The moment he appeared on the square, the other genius practitioners that belonged to the house of Marquis Qin in the square came to Tao's side and helped him to a quieter corner to recuperate from his injuries. Under the support of a few people, Tao's expression was still indifferent. However, his slightly trembling hands revealed the emotions in his heart at this moment. In the square, all the practitioners consciously opened up a path for Tao to walk through. Everyone stared at the young man in front of them in awe. They knew that this was a peerless genius who had almost reached the peak of Zhongling Mountain. Such a genius and expert would naturally receive everyone's respect and awe. Slowly sitting in the corner, Tao did not say a word from beginning to end. When he sat down, he immediately took out his identity token. His gaze was fixed on the light that was in second place, and his expression was filled with a complicated expression. He really did not expect that the young man, who he had not placed in his eyes back then, would actually be able to force him to such an extent in Zhongling Mountain. He had even forced him to use almost all of his trump cards. Zhuowen, first place will definitely be mine, unless you reach the peak of Zhongling Mountain. Chapter 524. 9999 steps. At this moment, regardless of whether it was the platform or the plaza, everyone seemed to have a tacit understanding as they sunk into silence. Heavy and excited breathing sounds gradually spread out from the crowd as their gazes were tightly fixed on the huge golden tower. This was because the 1,000-story golden tower had almost completely dimmed. Only the second story at the top still had a spot of light that was as dazzling as a small sun. Second place, Zhuowen, 9,950 steps. He was only 49 steps away from first place, Tao. Everyone was anticipating whether Zhuowen would be able to continue climbing and surpass Tao's record, break Zhongling Mountain's record and reach the peak of the unparalleled mountain. At a corner of the plaza, Tao was seated with his legs crossed. However, his face was no longer as indifferent as before. Instead, it was intertwined with a complicated and nervous expression as his gaze was tightly fixed on the identity token. He wanted to personally see exactly what level Zhuowen could reach. The expressions of the four super geniuses, Luo Xing, Zhu Kai, Xu Tianliang and Qin Batian, changed at this moment. The four of them blankly stared at Tao, who had a complicated expression on his face, before glancing at the identity token, at the spot of light that represented Zhuowen. Instantly, their hearts churned endlessly like stormy waves. Tao actually came out first. How can that Zhuowen be so strong? Qin Batian opened his mouth as he suddenly bitterly asked. Although Qin Batian admitted that Zhuowen's potential was extremely strong and his strength was not bad, from his point of view, he should be far from the number one genius of Muqin County, Tao. However, from the looks of it, the potential that Zhuowen had displayed was not the slightest bit weaker than Tao. In fact, to a certain extent, he was even stronger than Tao. Perhaps, this Zhuowen might be able to reach the peak of Zhongling Mountain and break the record of Zhongling Mountain that has existed for thousands of years. Luo Xing's beautiful eyes faintly flashed as she spoke with a complicated expression. Everything that Zhuowen had shown had far exceeded her imagination. This child's potential was far stronger than hers. Even Elvia Tao was slightly inferior. Xu Tianliang's face was gloomy to the extreme. He said coldly, "To be able to hold on until now, this Zhuowen's potential is indeed not bad. However, to surpass Brother Liu's record and reach the peak of the mountain, that is simply a fool's dream. Yes. In the past thousands of years, no one has truly climbed to the summit of Zhongling Mountain. Even the brilliant Lu Hantian from the previous competition and the even more stunning Lu Itao from this competition, these two exceptional geniuses have never climbed to the summit. It is unlikely that this Zhuowen will be able to reach the summit." Zhu Kai, who was dressed in blood-red clothes and whose eyes occasionally flashed with a blood-red glow, also stepped forward, his expression cold and indifferent. "Didn't you think that Zhuowen wouldn't be able to catch up with Elvia Tao? But now, not only has Zhuowen caught up, but he has also forced Elvia Tao to leave Zhongling Mountain in advance. Now that you are so sure that Zhuowen won't be able to reach the summit, don't shoot yourself in the foot when the time comes." Seeing that Xu Tianliang and Zhu Kai were united against a common enemy, a trace of disgust flashed across Luo Xing's beautiful eyes. She waved her hand and said impatiently. She had a hunch that Zhuowen might really be able to reach the summit and break the record that had not been broken for thousands of years. Xu Tianliang and Zhu Kai's faces suddenly turned ugly when they heard this. However, they did not argue with Luo Xing too much. After all, there was an ancient restriction in this square. They did not dare to make a move. Moreover, even if they made a move, they might not be a match for Luo Xing. Luo Xing was the second genius of Muqin County after all. Her strength was also unfathomable. Even if they joined forces, they might not be able to gain the slightest advantage against her. Brother Zhu. This Zhuowen must have a great secret on him. With his weak strength, he was actually able to catch up to Elvia Tao in Zhongling Mountain. It seems that this secret must be extremely precious. When we reach the 4th level, we must join forces to kill him. Xu Tianliang's eyes flickered as he suddenly sent a sound transmission to Zhu Kai beside him. Zhuowen's terrifying performance had already caused the killing intent in Xu Tianliang's heart to surge to the extreme. If this child was not eliminated, there would be no end of trouble in the future. Zhu Kai's eyes flickered as he nodded slightly. He was also very curious about what kind of secret Zhuowen had that could allow him, a second-wheel ultimate emperor stage expert, to advance triumphantly in Zhongling Mountain and force Elvia Tao to such an extent. Zhu Kai and Xu Tianliang naturally did not believe that Zhuowen's performance in Zhongling Mountain was based on his own strength. This was because before they entered Zhongling Mountain, Zhuowen's strength was only at the peak of the second-wheel ultimate emperor stage. With such strength, how could he continuously break through and increase his strength in such a harsh environment as Zhongling Mountain? This was simply impossible, unless there was external help. Zhuowen silently stood on the 9,950th step, his gaze focused on the identity token in his hand. Especially when he saw the light dot at the first place dim, Zhuowen could not help but reveal a trace of surprise on his face. He did not expect that Elvia Tao, who was only a step away from the 10,000th step, would not take another step. Instead, he chose to leave Zhongling Mountain. Is the last step of Zhongling Mountain really that terrifying? Zhuowen softly muttered as he raised his head slightly. His sharp gaze pierced through the layers of fog and shot towards the peak of the mountain. At this moment, at such a close distance, Zhuowen finally saw the hazy scenery on the peak of the mountain. Within the hazy clouds, there seemed to be a tall and solemn stone statue. The huge stone statue quietly stood on the peak of the mountain, as if it was holding up the entire sky. On the peak of the mountain. What is there? Even Elvia Tao is so desperate and yearning for it. What is there on the peak of the mountain? Deng deng deng. As he spoke, Zhuowen suddenly stepped out and slowly walked towards the last 50th step at a moderate speed. He wanted to see if he had the qualifications to reach the peak of the mountain. He wanted to see what was there on the peak of the mountain, and what was it that kept attracting everyone to climb towards the peak of the mountain. The moment Zhuowen stepped out, all the warriors in the square were in an uproar because they discovered that Zhuowen, who had stayed on the 9,950th step for a long time, finally moved at this moment. Look. Zhuowen has finally moved. He is moving towards the last 50th step. I wonder what level he can reach. This Zhuowen is indeed amazing. Although his speed is much slower now, compared to Elviatao, there is not much difference. I wonder if he can surpass Elviatao's height. Countless gazes converged on the light that represented Zhuowen. Everyone's breathing became rapid and heavy. It was as if every step Zhuowen took was stepping on their hearts. It was incomparably shocking. Deng deng deng. 9,960th step. 9,970th step. 9,980th step. 9,990th step. Boom. The moment his foot stepped on the 9,990th step, the pressure on the entire step almost produced a qualitative leap. Zhuowen's body even trembled. He let out a muffled groan as a trace of blood flowed out from the corner of his mouth. What a terrifying pressure. I really can't imagine how Elviatao managed to persevere until the 9,999th step. Zhuowen did not retreat. Instead, his gaze was extremely firm. After feeling the powerful pressure here, he also felt Elviatao's strength more and more. After all, Elviatao wasn't like Zhuowen, who relied on the replenishment of spirit energy and the improvement of his strength. Elviatao had completely relied on his own strength and foundation to finally reach the 9,999th step. Even Zhuowen admired such a magnificent feat. 9,991 step. Cross it for me. Resisting the pressure around him that was like the pressure of the deep sea, Zhuowen let out a low roar. His foot suddenly stomped on the 9,991st step. Suddenly, countless pressure turned into a whirlwind that blasted on Zhuowen's body. However, Zhuowen did not care. He directly stepped on the step like a madman. Poochie. A mouthful of blood was immediately spat out from his mouth. At this moment, Zhuowen's complexion became incomparably pale. Gritting his teeth, Zhuowen once again stepped forward, his speed as slow as an old ox pulling a cart. When Zhuowen stepped on the 9,990th step, the entire square was in an uproar. Uproars and exclamations were like a symphony, exploding across the sky and spreading to every corner of the square. Look, Zhuowen has reached the 9,990th step, and is still slowly climbing. Perhaps he really can reach Elviatao's height, or even surpass him. This Zhuowen is really too heaven-defying. I'm afraid that he's the only genius who can force Elviatao to such an extent in this Origin Chi Tower battle. Swoosh. Sitting cross-legged in the square, Elviatao's face could no longer remain calm. His eyes were tightly fixed on Zhuowen's light spot. Especially after seeing that Zhuowen had indeed reached the 9,990th step, his heart became incomparably nervous. Moreover, what made his breathing even more hurried was that Zhuowen's light spot was still ascending. Although the speed was very slow, there were indeed no signs of it stopping. 9,991st step. 9,993rd step. 9,995th step. 9,997th step. When Zhuowen's light spot reached the 9,997th step, Elviatao was finally unable to suppress the anxiety in his heart. He abruptly stood up, his gaze constantly fixed on Zhuowen's light spot. At this moment, the square had become incomparably silent. Everyone blankly stared at the light spot that had already reached the 9,997th step. They knew that the difference between Zhuowen and Elviatao was only 2 steps. On Zhongling Mountain, countless pressure accompanied the rolling clouds. At this moment, Zhuowen's hair was disheveled, sweat pouring down like rain. His face was pale, and his body that was covered in golden veins seemed to show signs of collapsing. 9,998th step, cross it for me. His eyes scarlet red, Zhuowen roared towards the sky. The unyielding feeling in his heart wantonly drifted out with this roar. With a boom, Zhuowen endured the pressure and directly stepped onto the 9,998th step, only 1 step away from Elviatao. 9,999th step, cross it for me. Chapter 525. First place, at the peak of the mountain. Boom. 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 Tremors that seemed like the heavens were falling and the earth suddenly erupted from the entire Zhongling Mountain. It was as if the inside of Zhongling Mountain had collapsed at this moment. Countless beastly roars seemed to converge at this moment, forming a ring-shaped intense sound wave that spread out. The instant Zhuowen's foot stepped onto the 999th step, the surrounding pressure seemed to form countless spiral-shaped cyclones at this moment. With a sharp whistle, they condensed on Zhuowen's body. Poochie. The intense pressure caused Zhuowen to involuntarily vomit a mouthful of blood. His face was as pale as snow, the veins on his forehead bulged, and cold sweat trickled down. Under this pressure, the foot that he had taken a step forward stagnated in mid-air and was on the verge of collapse. Step over. 365 acupoints, open all of them for me. With a low roar, Zhuowen's entire body was bathed in blood. Then, the foot that had stagnated in mid-air was like a falling meteor. In the end, it landed on the 999th step. Then, the entire Zhongling Mountain began to rumble. The instant Zhuowen reached the 999th step, the hearts of all the genius warriors in the plaza seemed to fiercely clench at this moment, and then violently beat for a moment. At this moment, the entire plaza became incomparably silent. Everyone stared straight at the light spot that represented Zhuowen. In the end, it overlapped with LV Atao's light spot, which had already dimmed. They knew that Zhuowen had reached the 999th step. At this moment, his ranking was already tied with LV Atao, tied for first place. Swoosh, swoosh. At this moment, regardless of whether it was the warriors in the plaza or the masters on the platform, they all stood up at this moment. Their gazes were tightly fixed on the light spot that was like a star in the vast starry sky. He reached it. Zhuowen has reached the 999th step, tied with LV Atao for first place. Oh my god. This Zhuowen has actually caught up to LV Atao, and is even tied with him. What kind of freak is this? I wonder if this Zhuowen will be able to take the final step and reach the summit of the Zhongling Mountain. Uproars, exclamations, and clamors were like endless firecrackers exploding in the entire square. Everyone's emotions were boiling the moment Zhuowen stepped onto the 9,999th step. Everyone's eyes were burning as they stared at the spot of light that was still shining brightly. They hoped, longed, and looked forward to whether this spot of light would be able to surpass LV Atao and reach the peak of the mountain. Creak. At this moment, LV Atao's pupils had almost shrunk to the size of a needle. His somewhat powerful hand tightly held the identity token. Looking at the light spot in the token that was at the same level as him, his expression suddenly changed. Zhuowen. Zhuowen. LV Atao muttered in a low voice. His eyes were filled with a complicated and crazy look. The pride he had always had in his heart, at this moment, was washed away the moment Zhuowen reached the 9,999th step. How is this possible? This Zhuowen is at the same level as LV Atao. He actually reached the 9,999th step? Xu Tianliang exclaimed. His eyes were filled with disbelief as he stared at the light spot on the identity token. Zhuowen's expression wasn't good either. He didn't expect that this Zhuowen would be so tenacious. He was actually able to persist for so long in the Zhongling Mountain and finally reach the same height as LV Atao. As for Qin Batian and Luo Xing, their eyes were filled with intense shock. At this moment, Zhuowen had undoubtedly become much more dazzling and blazing in their eyes. So what if this Zhuowen reached the 9,999th step? In the entire Zhongling Mountain, other than the peak, there's nothing good. Without reaching the peak, no matter how high you climb, it's useless. I'm afraid that in a while, this kid will directly withdraw from the Zhongling Mountain. Xu Tianliang's expression was extremely gloomy. His gaze coldly focused on the light spot that represented Zhuowen on the identity token. He knew that not long after LV Atao reached the 9,999th step, he directly withdrew from the Zhongling Mountain. Obviously, the pressure of the 10,000th step of the Zhongling Mountain was terrifying. Even a peerless genius like LV Atao couldn't resist it. He didn't think that Zhuowen was more powerful than LV Atao. After all, the fact that the former was able to be at the same rank as LV Atao was already extremely shocking. Time passed by minute. Everyone in the square stared at Zhuowen's light spot. They all wanted to see if this Zhuowen could surpass Elviatao and reach the peak of the mountain. As time passed, everyone discovered that the light spot that represented Zhuowen was gradually dimming. They weren't unfamiliar with this sign. It was a sign that the owner of the light spot couldn't hold on any longer. Once the light spot showed signs of dimming, it meant that the owner of the light spot had reached his limit. It also meant that this person would soon withdraw from the Zhongling mountain. Zhuowen's light spot is gradually dimming. Could it be that he can only reach the 9,999th step? Sigh. The peak of the Zhongling mountain is too terrifying. Even the two peerless geniuses, LV Hantian and LV Atao, were unable to cross the 10,000th step. Even Zhuowen, who has repeatedly created miracles, will probably return in failure. Zhuowen's light spot became dimmer and dimmer. Many people in the square revealed a trace of disappointment. Originally, they were looking forward to Zhuowen breaking the record of the Zhongling mountain and reaching the peak of the mountain. Now, it seemed that this wishful thinking was unlikely to be realized. When the originally nervous Elviatao discovered that Zhuowen's light spot was gradually dimming, he couldn't help but gently sigh in his heart. He was truly worried. If Zhuowen really reached the peak of the mountain, he didn't know what kind of emotions he would have in his heart. After a moment of silence, Elviatao suddenly whispered to himself, "Zhuowen, in this year's Yuan-Chi Tower battle, perhaps only you are my opponent and have the qualifications to compete with me for first place." The moment Elviatao gradually put away the command token, he suddenly caught a glimpse of the dimming dot of light from the corner of his eye. Suddenly, the dot of light once again glowed with a blazing light. At this moment, that light seemed so dazzling. On the 9,999th step, the golden veins in Zhuowen's body seemed to have ruptured. Countless amounts of blood suffused with a golden glow continuously flowed out from his body, causing Zhuowen to be filled with a tragic beauty. The 10,000th step. At the peak of the mountain, step over it for me. Zhuowen's eyes were filled with madness. Terrifying blood vessels filled the area around his eyes. His face was sinister, his expression was mournful, and his entire body was battered and exhausted. However, Zhuowen's face was filled with an unyielding expression, filled with unwillingness, and filled with no fear. In fact, Zhuowen could already clearly see the huge stone statue standing at the peak of the mountain behind the hazy fog. The stone statue seemed to be silently looking down at Zhuowen at this moment, seemingly mocking and pitying him. Boom boom boom. However, Zhuowen's foot that had been lifted into the air ultimately came to a halt. No matter how much Zhuowen struggled, no matter how unwilling he was unable to land on the 10,000th step that seemed to be within reach. Poochie. Like a raging wave, the pressure sealed Zhuowen's surroundings from all directions and bombarded Zhuowen's body. Suddenly, Zhuowen felt as if his body was attached to a huge mountain. Then, his chest felt numb, and he was directly sent flying by the powerful pressure. Zhuowen felt his mind go blank as he hovered in the air. His eyes were fixed on the stone statue on the mountain peak. The stone statue had been looking at him all this time. It seemed to be mocking him, but it also seemed to be pitying him. It was as if it had some kind of magical power. Living in this world is like living in thorns. If the heart is not moved, one will not act rashly. If one does not move, one will not be hurt. If one is moved, one will act rashly. One will hurt one's body and bones, thus experiencing all the pain in the world. The moment Zhuowen was sent flying, the golden torrent in Zhuowen's sea of consciousness suddenly transmitted a solemn voice. Immediately, it filled Zhuowen's ears and mind. Slowly, Zhuowen closed his eyes. At this moment, he was no longer looking at the statue at the peak of the mountain. Instead, he was immersed in the solemn voice. At this moment, he thought of the boundless sea, the towering mountains that reached into the clouds, the vast wilderness, and the blue sky with rolling clouds. The moment Zhuowen suddenly opened his eyes, they were unknowingly filled with dense golden light. If the heart is not moved, one will not act rashly. If one is not moved, one will not be hurt. If one is moved, one will act rashly. One will hurt one's body and bones, thus experiencing all the pain in the world. If the heart is not moved, then there will be no thoughts, no thoughts, and see through everything. Everything is nothing, right? At this moment, Zhuowen seemed to have understood something. When his eyes that were filled with golden light once again looked at the peak of the mountain, the stone statue that stood there did not exist. Or rather, it did not exist at all. Zhuowen was standing on the 9,999th step. He stood tall, his black robes fluttering in the absence of wind. So that's how it is. The 10,000th step of Zhongling Mountain does not have any pressure at all. Instead, it is a realistic illusion. The moment I stepped onto the 10,000th step, I had already fallen into that strange but realistic illusion. If I am unable to completely break through it, then I will never be able to reach the peak of Zhongling Mountain. Stomp. With that, Zhuowen stomped his foot and directly stepped onto the 10,000th step of Zhongling Mountain. Then, the entire mountain shook violently. Crack. When Lviatao caught a glimpse of the originally dim light spot from the corner of his eye, it actually glowed again at this moment. When it lit up like a candle, Lviatao was completely stunned on the spot. His face was filled with disbelief. Moreover, Zhuowen's light spot suddenly became dazzling at this moment. It was like a slowly rising sun. It became more and more dazzling and finally became dazzling. Then, the light spot that had been stagnant suddenly moved slightly. It crossed the 9,999th step and finally reached the 10,000th step that no one had ever stepped onto before. Crack. Chapter 526. Everyone was in an uproar. When this message finally appeared on everyone's identity medallion and golden pagoda, no matter if it was the genius cultivators on the square or the leaders of the various forces on the platform, they all fell into a dead silence at this moment. After a period of absolute silence, the entire square was filled with an uproar. The sound was getting louder and louder, as if the sky was collapsing and the sea was collapsing, suddenly engulfing the crowd. On the summit. Zhuowen has reached the summit. He has obtained the first place of Zhongling Mountain. Isn't this too unbelievable? This Zhuowen has actually crossed the 10,000th step, surpassing Lviatao and obtaining the first place. Not only that, this Zhuowen is the first cultivator in history to reach the summit of Zhongling Mountain. This person has broken the record of Zhongling Mountain that has existed for thousands of years. Everyone went crazy, excited, roaring, and even self-mutilating themselves to calm the emotions in their hearts. They never thought that Zhuowen would be able to reach the summit of Zhongling Mountain in the end, breaking the record that no one had ever set before. From now on, Zhuowen's name would truly shake Muqin County. His reputation might even surpass the original #1 genius of Muqin County, Lviatao. Lviatao stared blankly at the identity medallion that had already turned into fragments in his hand, as well as the dazzling light within the fragments. His expression was filled with a complicated expression. This was the first time he had tasted the feeling of defeat. This feeling was so uncomfortable that it made him feel suffocated. Zhuowen, I really never thought that you would be able to surpass me. However, defeating me in Zhongling Mountain doesn't necessarily mean that your strength is stronger than mine. It can only mean that your potential is higher than mine. I, Lviatao, am not that easy to surpass. When the time comes, I will still compete with you. Suddenly, a smile appeared on Lviatao's face. Within that smile, there was even a hint of battle intent hidden. This was the excitement and joy of finding an opponent that appreciated each other. Lviatao knew that ever since he was young, his path had been too smooth. He was #1 in everything. No matter who saw him, they would look at him with reverence and avoid him from afar. That was why he had developed such a proud and aloof personality. But now, Zhuowen's stunning performance gave Lviatao a wake-up call. He finally knew that there was always someone better than him. He was too conceited and arrogant in the past. If Lu Nantian was here to see Lviatao's change, he would definitely be very gratified. This was because Lviatao had finally opened up after this failure. In other words, Lviatao had recognized himself, and his mentality had also changed. Perhaps, after this battle, Lviatao would make another breakthrough. Speaking of which, Lv Nantian might have to thank Zhuowen for suppressing Lviatao in Zhongling Mountain. Hiss. Xu Tianliang sucked in a breath of cold air. He even rubbed his eyes with his hand. When he stared at the identity token again, he was stunned on the spot. He did not expect that Zhuowen would actually surpass Elviatao and finally reach the peak of the mountain. Zhuowen, this hateful little bastard, actually reached the peak of Zhongling Mountain. How did this bastard do it? At this moment, Xu Tianliang's eyes were filled with bewilderment. Zhuo Wen's stunning performance had completely stunned him. How much potential and strength did one need to be able to reach the peak of Zhongling Mountain? Suddenly crushing the identity token in his hand, Xu Tianliang's eyes were filled with killing intent. He thought to himself, I really did not expect this kid to reach this level. But when we reach the 4th floor, I want him to spit out all the benefits he obtained in Zhongling Mountain. I will also take that little bastard's life while I'm at it. Not far away, Zhu Kai, Qin Batian, and Luo Xing all had their mouths slightly open. The shock in their eyes was no less than Xu Tianliang's. This Zhuowen is really going to soar into the sky. This guy is the biggest dark horse I have ever seen. Qin Batian smacked his lips and said with a bitter smile. All of us have underestimated this Zhuowen. This child's potential far surpasses ours. Being able to ascend to the peak of Zhongling Mountain can be considered to be well-deserved. Luo Xing sighed softly. Her beautiful eyes were filled with a complicated expression. She still remembered that when Qing Lian first mentioned Zhuowen's name in Jade Lady Star Court, she didn't care at all. She didn't even put Zhuowen in her eyes. Later, when the battle for the Origin Qi Tower began, Zhuowen defeated the geniuses of the 4 high-grade cities on the 1st floor and seized control of the Ascension Island. At that time, she had just begun to pay attention to Zhuowen. However, she didn't put him in her eyes. After all, Zhuowen's performance was barely passable. Then, when the Heaven and Earth monolith Zhuowen forcefully charged into the Heaven stage area, she finally began to size up this youth who didn't have an outstanding appearance. Later, when Zhuowen overcame all the difficulties in the training mountain and even defeated LV Yongsheng, Zhuowen finally gained her attention. Because of this, she had even personally tried to recruit Zhuo Wen. However, what caused her to be surprised was that Zhuo Wen, who was clearly only an 18 or 19-year-old youth, had actually decisively rejected her invitation. The maturity and decisiveness he displayed ultimately caused her to have a higher opinion of him. However, the frustration of being rejected for the first time made Luo Xing unhappy and even a little angry. In the end, this kind of recruitment was left unsettled. Then, it was the battle for the ranking of the Zhongling Mountain. Zhuowen really underwent a transformation in the Zhongling Mountain. Step by step, he surpassed countless geniuses from the lowest level. Even she, who was one of the 5 great geniuses, was surpassed by him. And now, Zhuowen had caught up with the number 1 genius of Muqin County, Elviatao, and surpassed him. In the end, he reached the summit of the Zhongling Mountain. At this moment, Zhuowen's name had undoubtedly become much more dazzling. Now that she thought about it, Luo Xing suddenly realized that Zhuowen's experience could be described as a legend. This was a youth who constantly created miracles. Zhuowen, he. What kind of person is he? Luo Xing's beautiful eyes quietly stared at the light that represented Zhuowen, and she once again asked such a question. Compared to the degree of excitement of the numerous geniuses in the square, on the platform at the summit of the 2nd level of the Vitality Tower, countless leaders had already involuntarily stood up at this moment. Even LV Nantian, the master of the meteorite, and the other 4 magnates had also stood up. Their hearts were like raging waves. Gulp. The sound of saliva being swallowed could be heard on the somewhat quiet platform. No one had expected that Zhuowen would actually surpass Elviatao in the end and become the number 1 of the Zhongling Mountain this time. Moreover, he had even reached the summit of the Zhongling Mountain. Zhuowen, he, broke the record of the Zhongling Mountain that had existed for thousands of years, and also created an immortal legend. In the countless Vitality Tower battles, no genius has ever reached the summit of the Zhongling Mountain. Zhuowen, he has really reached the summit. At this moment, LV Nanshan's entire body suddenly trembled. His hands trembled as he stared straight at the dazzling light at the top of the Golden Tower. His eyes were filled with excitement and a complicated expression. He was excited because someone had finally broken the record of the Zhongling Mountain. What was complicated was that the person who broke the record was not LV Atao, who he had high hopes for. And LV Nanshan's words were like a fuse that had been ignited. The entire silent platform was set off in an uproar like a huge wave. All of the leaders of the various factions had heated gazes as they discussed, chatted, and discussed. The focal point of these discussions was undoubtedly Zhuo Wen. In fact, the gazes of many of the leaders of the various factions were currently gathered on Jiyu Yutian, Qiu Chou, and Ouyang Yuntu. They all knew that these three people were undoubtedly the three people who had the best relationship with Zhuowen. Especially Jiyu Yutian, who was the city lord of Rattan Armor City. At this moment, Jiyu Yutian seemed to have become a delicious cake in everyone's eyes. Everyone gathered around Jiyu Yutian, and the sounds of discussion were even more overwhelming. Lord Jiyu Cheng, you must cooperate with our Golden Scale City. In any case, we are one of the top-ranked super cities. If you cooperate with us, we will agree to any conditions. What is your Golden Scale City? Our Black Rock City is one of the top 5 super cities. Our foundation is much deeper than yours. Lord Jiyu Cheng, if you cooperate with us, we will definitely give you a satisfactory price. Is your Black Rock City very amazing? Lord Jiyu Cheng, I am Ling Tian from Ling Tian City. If you cooperate with us, I, Ling Tian, am willing to give you a royal armor skill as a reward. What do you think? When this voice sounded out, the crowd gasped. Following this, a middle-aged man in white clothes smiled as he slowly walked towards Jiyu Yutian, his eyes filled with kindness. It's actually the city lord of the number 1 super city, Ling Tian City. Isn't this reward too generous? It's just a cooperation, yet he's willing to give us a royal armor skill. This Ling Tian is so generous. Ling Tian City is the super city closest to the top 5 super cities, and its foundation is much deeper than an ordinary super cities. It's not surprising that they would give us a royal armor skill. Since Ling Tian has acted, looks like we don't have a chance. Seeing Ling Tian slowly walk over, the other city lords inwardly cursed at their bad luck. They unwillingly stopped bothering Jiyu Yutian and instead looked at Jiyu Yutian. At this moment, Jiyu Yutian's mind was already muddled by the immense joy. Even he didn't expect that Zhuo Wen would actually surpass LV Atao and obtain first place, and even break the record to enter the peak of Zhongling Mountain. All of this, in his eyes, was like a dream, extremely unreal. With so many super cities looking at him with flattering smiles, even he felt a bit embarrassed. What's more, the city lord of Ling Tian City had used a royal armor skill in exchange for a chance to cooperate with Rattan Armor City. This caused his mind to go blank, and he felt as if he could not think at all. Happiness had truly come too suddenly at this moment, so sudden that even Jiyu Yutian wasn't prepared for it. Zhuowen, oh Zhuowen, I never thought that you would bring such great fortune to our Rattan Armor City. After we return, your Zhuo family will have the same status as our city lord's residence and will have the same authority as our city lord's residence. Chapter 527. 3 Heavenly Tribulations. The moment Zhuo Wen reached the peak of the huge Zhongling Mountain, the clouds that were originally lingering around it completely disappeared, revealing the bare mountain and the peak of the mountain that towered into the clouds. On the square, everyone could not help but raise their heads. Their gazes were focused on the peak of Zhongling Mountain. They seemed to have seen a proud figure standing on the peak of the mountain. They knew that the figure was the only one who had reached the peak, Zhuo Wen. Zhuowen stood tall on the peak as a furious gust of wind blew over, causing his clothes and hair to flutter. Standing on the peak and looking down on all the living beings below, this feeling of looking down on all the mountains is truly wonderful. Zhuo Wen lowered his head and faced the raging wind in front of him. His gaze looked down at everyone in the plaza below Zhongling Mountain from top to bottom. He saw the unwilling Shu Tianliang, the shocked Qin Batian, the complicated Luo Xing, the cold and emotionless Zhu Kai, as well as the calm Elviatao and the countless other geniuses in the square. The expressions on all their faces were magnified infinitely in Zhuowen's eyes, as if they were right before his eyes. At the same time, Zhuowen saw the entire 3rd floor of the tower from afar. It was a vast and desolate wilderness. Thick smoke filled the wilderness. It was simply a wasteland. Zhuo slowly extended his right hand and gently pinched the air. It was as if everything below was within his grasp at this moment. The feeling of being in control of fate made Zhuo feel a sense of excitement in his heart. My fate is in my own hands, not the heavens. Zhuo raised his head slightly and roared. At the same time, waves of aura surged out from his body. This aura had far surpassed the peak of the second wheel of the Ultimate Emperor realm. It had even reached the third wheel of the Ultimate Emperor realm. This aura. Is this kid about to break through? In his sea of consciousness, Xiao He also felt the aura that had suddenly surged out from Zhuowen's body. A trace of surprise appeared on his face. But speaking of which, it's about time for this kid to break through. After all, Zhuowen has been at the peak of the second wheel for quite some time. Coupled with the replenishment of the spiritual energy in Zhongling Mountain, his accumulation has become extremely deep. Now that he's reached the peak, it's only logical for him to break through. After pondering for a moment, Xiao He was not too surprised. After all, Zhuowen had absorbed a lot of spiritual energy in Zhongling Mountain. Although most of the spiritual energy had been used to break through the apertures in his body, there would always be a portion of it that would flow into his meridians and dantian during the process of absorption. Although the amount of spiritual qi was small, it had accumulated over the course of many times. Thus, Zhuo had naturally entered the ultimate three-wheel emperor realm. Boom, boom, boom. The moment Zhuowen's aura swelled to the peak of the third wheel, countless terrifying dark clouds that resembled black dragons gathered in the sky above Zhongling Mountain. Countless bolts of lightning as thick as buckets slithered between the dark clouds. It looked extremely ferocious and terrifying. The three heavenly tribulations had finally descended. As Zhuowen prepared to undergo the three heavenly tribulations, all the cultivators in the square below Zhongling Mountain noticed the dark clouds that were constantly gathering in the sky above Zhongling Mountain, as well as the monstrous lightning that constantly flashed between the dark clouds. Is that a heavenly tribulation? That Zhuo actually made a breakthrough after reaching the summit. He should have broken through. Those dark clouds are indeed unique to heavenly tribulations. However, Zhuowen's heavenly tribulation doesn't seem to be very strong this time. It doesn't seem like 5 heavenly tribulations. Yes. This aura is indeed much weaker than 5 heavenly tribulations. It's even weaker than 4 heavenly tribulations. It seems like it's only 3 heavenly tribulations. The moment the heavenly tribulation appeared, everyone in the square was stunned. This was because they discovered that the heavenly tribulation that appeared at the peak of Zhongling Mountain was pitifully weak. It wasn't the 5 heavenly tribulations that they had imagined at all. Due to Zhuowen's heaven-defying performance on Zhongling Mountain, everyone believed that Zhuowen's strength had at least reached the peak of the fourth wheel. Therefore, from the moment the heavenly tribulation appeared, they subconsciously believed that Zhuowen was going to undergo 5 heavenly tribulations. However, after careful observation, they were shocked to discover that the heavenly tribulation Zhuowen was undergoing was extremely weak. It was only at the level of 3 heavenly tribulations. In other words, Zhuowen had always been a peak of the second wheel of the Ultimate Emperor realm. He's actually only a peak of the second wheel of the Ultimate Emperor realm? How did this Zhuowen survive until the end on Zhongling Mountain with such meager strength and finally reach the peak of Zhongling Mountain? After confirming that the dark clouds at the peak of Zhongling Mountain were only 3 heavenly tribulations, all the cultivators in the square were stunned. They began to wonder how Zhuowen had reached the peak with such meager strength. LV Itao frowned slightly in the corner of the square. Naturally, he could sense that the aura of the dark clouds at the peak of the mountain was extremely weak. It was only at the level of 3 heavenly tribulations. In other words, Zhuowen was only a peak of the second wheel of the Ultimate Emperor realm. Just how did Zhuowen surpass me and reach the peak with such strength? LV Itao clenched his fists and sucked in a deep breath. His heart was filled with doubt. Luo Xing, Xu Tianliang, Qin Batian, and Zhu Kai also had the same doubts as LV Itao. They were also surprised that Zhuowen was still only a peak of the second wheel of the Ultimate Emperor realm. This little bastard must have known of some unknown shortcut in Zhongling Mountain. That's why he was able to reach the peak of Zhongling Mountain. It can only be said that the bastard's luck is pretty good. However, when he reaches the 4th level of the Origin Chi Tower, this bastard won't have such good luck. Xu Tianliang's gaze was gloomy. After seeing the 3 heavenly tribulations at the peak of the mountain, his face was filled with joy instead of shock. He was even more certain that Zhuowen had reached the peak of Zhongling Mountain by using some secret that they didn't know of. Originally, Xu Tianliang was worried that Zhuowen's strength would become very strong. When he reached the 4th level, it wouldn't be so easy to deal with him. However, the 3 heavenly tribulations had completely dispelled the worries in Xu Tianliang's heart. He knew that even if Zhuowen had survived 3 heavenly tribulations, he was only a peak of the 3rd wheel of the ultimate emperor realm. Although this kind of strength wasn't bad, it wasn't enough in Xu Tianliang's eyes. Thinking of this, Xu Tianliang made up his mind. When he reached the 4th level of the Origin Chi Tower, he would make Zhuowen suffer a fate worse than death. He also wouldn't let go of the secrets on Zhuowen's body because he felt that there were many secrets on Zhuowen's body. Just as everyone in the square was filled with doubts, on the peak of the mountain, Zhuowen had his hands behind his back. He raised his head slightly and a faint smile appeared on the corner of his mouth as he looked at the rolling dark clouds in the sky. After reaching the entry level of the Great Nirvana Sun, all 365 acupoints in his body had been opened. The strength of Zhuowen's body had already reached an unparalleled level. Just the strength of his body alone might not be able to break through the all-out attack of a peak ultimate emperor realm cultivator. With Zhuowen's current strength, he didn't need to fear the 3 heavenly tribulations at all. In fact, there was even an eager look in his eyes. Ever since he had broken through the entry level of the Great Nirvana Sun, he hadn't tested the strength of his body. I can use these 3 heavenly tribulations to test the strength of my body and see how strong it has become. Zhuowen's eyes flickered as he clenched his right hand. Instantly, countless golden veins covered his arm. The blazing golden light illuminated Zhuowen's face, making it look dazzling. Boom, boom, boom. Finally, the countless bolts of lightning in the dense dark clouds in the sky collided with each other. Afterwards, huge bolts of lightning the size of buckets descended, each one more terrifying and thick than the last. It was as if the entire mountain peak had been enveloped by countless bolts of lightning, forming a huge cage of lightning. Compared to the terrifyingly huge lightning bolts, Zhuowen's somewhat frail body appeared so small and insignificant. However, it was this insignificant figure that fearlessly extended its arms and attacked the countless bolts of lightning that directly shot towards it. The next moment, when the huge cage formed by countless thunderbolts appeared, a golden light that was as hot as the sun spread out in all directions. Ring-shaped golden ripples spread out, faintly revealing a powerful power that was gradually transmitted in the air. Boom, boom, boom. Instantly, the huge cage of lightning collapsed inch by inch as the golden light spread outwards, disappearing into nothingness. A figure covered in golden light silently stood there, like an ancient Buddha. Again, laughing loudly, Zhuowen was not afraid at all. In fact, he even seemed to be enjoying himself. This was because he discovered that even the 3 heavenly tribulations were unable to cause any harm to his body. Not even his skin was broken. Boom, boom, boom. The dark clouds in the sky grew denser and denser, and the lightning became even more terrifying. Bolt after bolt struck Zhuowen's body as if they would not tire at all. However, Zhuowen only smiled faintly. He completely ignored them and allowed the lightning to strike his body. Surprisingly, it did not cause any harm to his body at all. Instead, after the lightning struck, Zhuowen's body began to glow faintly. The might of the lightning was a form of tempering, even though the effects on Zhuowen were minuscule. After breaking through the last bolt of lightning, Zhuowen stood quietly on the mountain peak. A terrifying aura surged out from his body. This aura is much stronger than the initial and intermediate Ultimate Emperor realm. Have I suddenly reached the advanced Ultimate Emperor realm? Zhuowen muttered to himself in surprise as he sensed the powerful aura in his body. Chapter 528. Bronze Coffin. Zhuowen nodded slightly. After reaching the Ultimate Emperor stage, he felt a wave of comfort in his heart. His gaze shifted slightly, and Zhuowen's gaze immediately focused on the scenery at the top of the mountain. However, what stunned Zhuowen was that there was nothing at the top of Zhongling Mountain. There was not even a blade of grass growing on the ground, and it looked extremely desolate. Moreover, the huge stone statue that he had seen at the bottom of the mountain was nowhere to be seen. It seemed that the stone statue was indeed an illusion. Could it be that there is nothing at the top of the mountain? Didn't Lu Nantian say that there was a great fortune at the top of Zhongling Mountain? Could it be that Lu Nantian was lying? Zhuowen's brows furrowed even tighter as he looked around. He had painstakingly climbed to the top of Zhongling Mountain not just for the first place, but for the great fortune that Lu Nantian had mentioned. Wait, kid, take another 10 steps forward and see. Suddenly, Xiao Hei's voice rang out in his mind, and there was a trace of caution in her tone. Upon hearing this, Zhuowen slowly took 10 steps forward. Instantly, Zhuowen felt as if the world before him was spinning, and then the scenery before his eyes had completely changed. He saw that the greenery before him was dense, and the greenery gradually thickened. There was no longer the desolate and dilapidated scenery from before. It seems that what you saw earlier was also an illusion. This is the real thing. Xiao Hei's voice rang out once again, and she clicked her tongue in wonder. Only then did Zhuowen come to a sudden realization. It seemed that the top of Zhongling Mountain was indeed extraordinary, and there was actually such an illusion set up. If Xiao Hei had not reminded him, he was afraid that he would have really missed this place. There is a cave in front. Let's go take a look. Suddenly, Zhuowen's gaze moved, and he saw a rather short cave at the end of the greenery, and a trace of joy immediately appeared on his face. The cave was only half the height of a person. If he wanted to enter, he would have to bend his body down. It was extremely deep inside. Moreover, Zhuowen could also sense a trace of faintly discernible cold aura drifting inside, causing him to involuntarily shiver. Looks like there's more to this cave than meets the eye. Kid, are you going in? Xiao Hei cautiously asked. Zhuowen's eyes flickered. He knew that the treasures of this mountain peak were most likely in this cave. After pondering for a moment, he clenched his teeth and said, "Enter. Of course I have to go in. It's very likely that there are great benefits inside. I can't just miss it." "Then you have to be careful. I keep feeling that this cave is a little strange. Perhaps there is some kind of danger inside." Xiao Hei nodded and said with some worry, "I will pay attention to this matter. After all, we have already made it this far. If we return empty-handed, it really won't be worth it." Nodding his head, Zhuowen took a step forward and directly entered the short and deep cave. As he gently walked in the short cave, Zhuowen discovered that the inside of the cave was not as pitch black as it looked from the outside. Instead, there was a faint fluorescent glow. With Zhuowen's cultivation, he was naturally able to see through the entire cave. Along the way, Zhuowen did not discover anything. Other than the pitch-black rock walls, there was nothing else. After about an incense stick's worth of time, Zhuowen was still walking in the cave, as if there was no end to the cave. What's the matter with this cave? We have already walked for so long, but we still haven't reached the end. Frowning slightly, Zhuowen said with some annoyance in his heart. "Don't worry, we are almost there," Xiao Hei said rather calmly. Sure enough, Zhuowen walked for another 15 minutes and quickly reached the end of the cave. However, when he saw the scene at the end of the cave, his eyebrows tightened. At the end of the cave was an uneven rock wall. This rock wall was slightly different from the other rock walls. It was not brown in color, but a strange purplish black. In the pitch-black cave, it emitted a faint purplish glow, appearing distant and mysterious. With his eyebrows tightly knitted, Zhuowen arrived in front of this strange rock wall. He could clearly feel the mental energy in his Niwen Palace suddenly surging. The golden waves in his Niwen Palace rose higher and higher, as if expressing his joy. "Hey! My Niwen Palace is actually reacting. What is this purplish rock wall?" Suddenly, a sudden impulse surged from the depths of Zhuowen's heart, causing Zhuowen to involuntarily touch the purplish black rock wall. Even if Zhuowen subconsciously tried to stop himself, Zhuowen's entire body seemed to be controlled by a strong force, and he could not move at all. Clang! The moment Zhuowen touched the purplish rock wall, The seemingly indestructible rock wall instantly collapsed and turned into dust. When the dust settled, Zhuowen discovered that there was actually a deep tunnel at the other end of the rock wall. I never thought that there would be another mystery behind this purplish rock wall. A strange look flashed across his eyes. Zhuowen's face revealed a hint of hesitation, but in the end, he gritted his teeth and stepped into the tunnel. The tunnel was much wider than the previous cave, and Zhuowen did not encounter any obstacles along the way. When he reached the end of the tunnel, Zhuowen's face suddenly revealed an expression as if he had seen a ghost. At the end of the tunnel, what appeared in front of Zhuowen was a rather vast hall, and in the middle of the hall sat an extremely magnificent bronze coffin. It can't be, right? Why is it a coffin again? When I was at the training mountain, I had already encountered a coffin once. Why would I encounter a coffin again at the peak of Zhongling Mountain? The moment he saw the bronze coffin in front of him, Zhuowen suddenly felt a pain in his balls. He couldn't help but wonder if he was fated with coffins. Why did he keep encountering these kinds of coffins? Kid, perhaps you really are fated with coffins. Seeing Zhuowen's pained expression, Xiaohei teased him with a rare smile. Soon after, she sternly said, "The golden coffin that you encountered at the last stage of the training mountain was a pretty good fortune. After all, it allowed you to obtain a terrifying body-refining technique like the Great Sun Nirvana. Now, this bronze coffin is even more mysterious and terrifying than the golden coffin. I'm afraid that the things inside are much better than the golden coffin. Kid, don't complain, you really don't know how lucky you are." After she finished speaking, Xiaohei could not help but roll her eyes at Zhuowen. With an embarrassed smile, Zhuowen looked at the bronze coffin in front of him. He also knew that this coffin was very likely not simple, because he could faintly feel a terrifying aura from this bronze coffin. This aura was far more powerful than the golden coffin that he had encountered previously. "I'm afraid that there might be another elite skeleton inside." Muttering to himself, Zhuowen took a step forward and immediately arrived in front of the bronze coffin. The surface of the bronze coffin in front of him revealed spots of rust, looking ancient and weathered. His eyes flickered. Zhuowen's right hand was immediately covered with golden veins. First, he respectfully bowed, then Zhuowen violently slammed his palm on the coffin lid. Clang! The sound of metal clashing immediately resounded. Zhuowen let out a muffled groan and actually retreated a dozen steps before coming to a stop. His eyes were filled with shock as he looked at the bronze coffin in front of him. The bronze coffin lid in front of him had only moved a few inches. There was still a huge gap before it could be completely opened. This coffin lid is really incomparably thick. Hitting it feels like hitting a 10,000-foot tall mountain. Rubbing his somewhat numb hand, Zhuowen's eyes finally revealed a trace of caution. He knew that he had to use all his strength in order to open this bronze coffin. 360 acupuncture points, open all of them for me. With a low roar, the countless acupuncture points in Zhuowen's body suddenly opened up like a whirlpool. Under the connection of the acupuncture points, a rich gold color spread all over Zhuowen's body. Instantly, Zhuowen's entire body turned into a blazing golden man. A terrifying aura overflowed from his body. Boom! Taking a step forward, Zhuowen violently slammed his palm on the coffin lid. Instantly, countless waves of air swirled in the air. The coffin lid, which was originally motionless, trembled slightly. Immediately, it moved about half a meter away, creating an opening. Swoosh! A pitch-black illusory figure suddenly shot out of the bronze coffin when an opening appeared. It immediately rushed towards Zhuowen's forehead. This illusory figure was only an inch in size. If one did not look carefully, it would be impossible to discover it. The moment this black shadow rushed over, Zhuowen's expression changed slightly. His right hand flickered with a golden light as he suddenly waved it. Instantly, it blocked in front of him. Fart! Zhuowen only felt a piercing pain in his palm. Then, he was shocked to discover that his right palm had actually been directly pierced through by this tiny shadow. Drops of cherry-red blood continuously dripped down, looking mournful and ferocious. What? It actually directly pierced through my palm? The moment Zhuowen discovered that his palm had been pierced through, his expression could not help but change drastically. One had to know that all the acupuncture points in his body had been opened. The strength of his body was extremely terrifying. Even LV Itao, who was at the ultimate emperor realm, might not be able to easily break through his body. However, this mysterious shadow in front of him had actually pierced through his palm like tofu. This truly shocked Zhuowen. After this shadow pierced through Zhuowen's palm, it actually continued to rush towards Zhuowen's forehead without slowing down. Its speed was even faster than before. As he watched the shadow get closer and closer, the ominous feeling in Zhuowen's heart grew stronger and stronger. His forehead was covered in cold sweat. He was certain that if this shadow were to drill into the depths of his forehead, he would probably be in imminent danger. However, this shadow was simply too fast. It was not very possible for Zhuowen to dodge now. Just what is this thing? What should I do? If it drills into my forehead, I'm afraid my life will be in danger. At this moment, Zhuowen finally felt a deep sense of fear. This tiny shadow actually brought him the threat of death. Roar! Suddenly, just as this shadow was about to reach Zhuowen's forehead, a deep dragon's roar suddenly erupted from Zhuowen's body. Then, an ink-black mist swept out from Zhuowen's forehead. It actually transformed into a palm-sized ink-black dragon covered in scales. Ah! Chapter 529. Heavenly Rank Soul Treasure Trying to Escape? I'm afraid it won't be that easy. The little dragon that had emerged from between his brows was naturally Xiao Hei. When Xiao Hei saw that the black shadow was trying to escape, she snorted coldly. With a whoosh, she turned into a black bolt of lightning and instantly caught up to the fleeing black shadow. Boom! Xiao Hei waved her right hand. Immediately, countless ink-black mist turned into a miniature cage in her palm, trapping the fleeing black shadow within. Only now did Zhuowen see the true appearance of the black shadow. It was only the size of a thumb and looked like some kind of insect. Its shell was covered in sinister black hooks, and at the front of the black shadow was an inch-long spike. Zhuowen's eyes narrowed when his gaze focused on the spike of the unknown creature. He realized that the spike that had pierced through his palm was the spike at the front of the unknown creature. He knew that if Xiao Hei had not acted in time, the unknown creature might have directly burrowed into the space between his brows. The consequences would have been unimaginable. Xiao Hei. What is this thing? Its penetrative power is actually so strong. If you hadn't acted earlier, I'm afraid I would have been in danger. A trace of curiosity appeared on Zhuowen's face, especially when he saw the serious expression on Xiao Hei's face. He knew that the unknown creature was not simple. This creature is called a soul-devouring bug. It's a strange creature that specializes in devouring the souls of cultivators. Moreover, the spike at the front of this creature is extremely sharp. Even an ultimate ninth wheel Emperor Realm cultivator could be ambushed by it if they are not careful. If I hadn't discovered it earlier, you would probably be dead by now, Xiao Hei said solemnly. It's that terrifying? Even an ultimate ninth wheel Emperor Realm cultivator could be ambushed by it. Zhuowen could not help but be shocked when he heard this. He never thought that this tiny creature would actually be so powerful. Millimeter. It's a good thing that this beast is extremely afraid of the Dragon Clan's aura. That's why it was so afraid of me from the beginning. If this beast had really fought with its life on the line, I might not have been able to take it down so easily. Xiao Hei pursed her lips. Her gaze focused on the still trembling soul-devouring bug in the black cage as she shook her head. Zhuowen also understood why the soul-devouring bug had fled when it saw Xiao Hei. It was because it was afraid of the Dragon Clan's aura. It looks like he had benefited from Xiao Hei this time. How do we deal with the soul-devouring insects? Zhuowen asked after a moment of hesitation. This soul-devouring insect was too much of a threat to him. He couldn't guarantee when this thing would break out of the black cage and attack him. The soul-devouring bug's body is extremely tough. You've also felt how terrifying it is just now. Therefore, it's basically impossible for you to destroy this soul-devouring bug with your current strength. Zhuowen frowned slightly when he heard this. The soul-devouring bug was quite a big threat. He did not dare to stay with such a terrifying creature for more than 15 minutes. After thinking about it, Zhuowen decided to quickly open the bronze coffin and leave Zhongling Mountain after obtaining the benefits inside. Let's take a look at what's inside this bronze coffin. After pondering for a moment, Zhuowen finally arrived in front of the bronze coffin. He slammed his right hand on the coffin lid, which had originally revealed a gap, and more than half of it was directly pushed open by Zhuowen. The scene inside was completely revealed to him. As Zhuowen expected, there was indeed a skeleton lying in the coffin. However, the surface of the skeleton was bluish-gray, which looked quite strange. In addition to the skeleton, Zhuowen also found a scarlet token inside. Gently picking up the scarlet token, Zhuowen looked at it carefully. He knew that the things that could be buried with this coffin were not simple goods. The blood-red token was only the size of a palm and was completely blood-red. Moreover, its surface even faintly emitted the smell of blood, causing Zhuowen to frown slightly. He thought to himself that this blood-red token was strange. The scarlet token was engraved with words on both sides. The word blood was engraved on the front, and the word demon was engraved on the back. When combined, it was the word blood demon. Blood demon? Is this token related to the blood demon? Looking at the words on the token, Zhuowen frowned slightly. He could not help but sigh in his heart that he was really fated to meet the blood demon. When he fought with LV Yongsheng, the latter used the blood demon's moves. Now, he encountered a token related to the blood demon at the top of Zhongling Mountain. Nonsense. Since the two words blood demon are written on this token, it means that this token has an extremely important relationship with the blood demon. Moreover, this dragon lord feels that this token is very likely not simple. I heard that there is an extremely powerful inheritance on the 4th floor called the blood demon inheritance. Perhaps this token is related to the blood demon inheritance on the 4th floor. Xiao He also saw the words on the scarlet token. He rubbed his chin and analyzed. Hearing this, Zhuowen also nodded. He also felt that this token was related to the blood demon inheritance on the 4th floor. However, it was said that the blood demon inheritance was extremely terrifying. In the past, many geniuses had chosen that inheritance. However, they all died in the inheritance land. Moreover, the most exciting genius in the previous batch, Lu Hantian, did not succeed in obtaining the blood demon inheritance. In the end, he fled the inheritance land in a sorry state and died in depression. From this, it could be seen that the blood demon inheritance was not something that ordinary people could obtain. Zhuowen knew his own limits. With his strength, it was very difficult to obtain the blood demon inheritance. Therefore, he did not have extravagant hopes of obtaining the blood demon inheritance. Zhuowen silently put away the blood-colored token and began to search the coffin again. He did not believe that such a large coffin would only contain such a useless blood-colored token. After searching for a long time, Zhuowen even searched every corner. However, Zhuowen was disappointed. There was nothing else in the coffin. Damn it! It's gone. There's actually nothing left. Zhuowen's face twitched as he took a deep breath, and he couldn't help but curse while he felt extremely depressed in his heart. Could it be that I've only obtained a blood-colored command token that doesn't seem to be of any use after working so hard to get here? Wait. Kid, look at that corner. There seems to be some words. Go take a look. Suddenly, Xiao He came to the corner of the coffin. She pointed at the corner with her little claws, and her eyes revealed a trace of light. Hearing this, Zhuowen immediately came to the corner where Xiao He was. Sure enough, he saw a line of words there. Fated person. Congratulations on reaching the peak of Zhongling Mountain. Being able to reach the peak of Zhongling Mountain means that your strength, perseverance, and insight far surpass ordinary people. This bronze coffin is a heaven-rank spirit treasure refined by me. Although it can't compare to a powerful monarch spirit treasure like Zhongling Mountain, its power is quite extraordinary. Now, as long as you agree to a request of mine and swear to the heavenly Tao, this bronze coffin will directly recognize you as its master. In the future, this heaven-rank spirit treasure will belong to you. My request is very simple. That is to head to the 4th level of the Origin Chi Tower and enter the Blood Demon Inheritance to obtain the Blood Demon Inheritance. Perhaps you still don't understand the Blood Demon Inheritance. The blood demon inheritance on the 4th level is the most terrifying of all the inheritances. As long as you can obtain this inheritance, you will benefit endlessly. Of course, it is also the most difficult and dangerous. If you are not careful, it is very likely that your life will be in danger. However, you can rest assured. There is a blood demon token in the bronze coffin. This blood demon token is actually a type of pass to the blood demon inheritance. There are a total of 18 obstacles in the blood demon inheritance. As long as you pass the first 8 obstacles and use the blood demon token, you will be able to directly enter the core area of the blood demon inheritance. There, you will be able to directly receive the inheritance. Seeing this, Zhuowen frowned slightly. At the same time, he looked at the bronze coffin in front of him with some surprise. He did not expect that this ordinary bronze coffin in front of him would actually be a heaven-rank spirit treasure. Moreover, the owner of this coffin had said that this bronze coffin was personally refined by him. Obviously, the owner of this coffin was definitely a peerless expert. After all, not just anyone could refine a heaven-rank spirit treasure. It required a cultivation of at least the 4th venerable realm or above. However, what Zhuowen did not understand was why the owner of this coffin wanted him to receive the blood demon inheritance. Could it be that after he received the blood demon inheritance, the owner of this coffin would benefit in some way? Xiao He. Shaking his head, Zhuowen had no choice but to ask Xiao He for help. He felt that the owner of this coffin's request was somewhat strange. Continue reading. There is a paragraph of writing at the bottom. Xiao He shook her head and suddenly pointed at the bottom. Hearing this, Zhuowen also noticed the writing at the bottom. As it was written at the bottom corner, Zhuowen did not notice it at first. A fated person. Perhaps you are very puzzled as to why I want you to receive the blood demon inheritance. I will tell you the truth. In fact, the ancient blood demon is not dead. Its soul is hidden in the land of the blood demon inheritance. At that time, I discovered it by chance. However, before I could say anything, I was discovered by the soul of the blood demon and had a great battle with it. In the end, I was naturally defeated. However, the soul of the blood demon was not any better. It was severely injured by me and fell into a deep sleep in the land of the inheritance. As long as the blood demon is given a certain amount of time, the soul of the blood demon will awaken again. The only way to destroy the soul of the blood demon is for someone to successfully obtain the blood demon inheritance. As long as the blood demon inheritance is taken away by someone, the soul of the blood demon will have no medium to rely on. At that time, it will naturally disperse. However, the blood demon inheritance is too difficult. Very few warriors can successfully obtain it. However, a fated person, since you were able to climb to the top of Zhongling Mountain, it means that you are not an ordinary genius warrior. You might be able to successfully obtain the blood demon inheritance and completely destroy the soul of the blood demon. Of course, if you are unwilling, I will not force you. After all, this kind of thing is consensual. However, you cannot take away the blood demon token and the bronze coffin. These 2 items were originally prepared for entering the land of the blood demon inheritance. Seeing this, Zhuowen's expression turned ugly. Needless to say, the land of the blood demon inheritance was extremely dangerous. Zhuowen could ignore the blood demon token, but he had no choice but to pay attention to the bronze coffin. After all, this was a genuine heaven-rank soul treasure. It would be of great benefit to him. Chapter 530. The bronze coffin's function. Xiao He. Do you think I should follow this person's request and head to the blood devil's inheritance land? Zhuowen was still somewhat hesitant in his heart. After all, this bronze coffin was a genuine heavenly soul treasure. It was a soul treasure that was even more terrifying than the 9-wheel burning sky cauldron in his possession. If he could obtain this soul treasure, his strength would definitely rise to a whole new level. Xiao He pondered for a moment, then spread out his hands and said, "This matter still needs to be decided by you. However, this Dragon Lord must warn you in advance that the Blood Devil's inheritance will definitely be extremely difficult. Even if you succeed, your chances of success are not high. Therefore, You should consider it carefully. Hearing this, Zhuowen's eyes flickered. He gritted his teeth and said, I'll do it. It would be a waste if I don't take the heavenly soul treasure. After all, after reaching the 4th floor, I will have to fight for the inheritance. It's not impossible to attempt the Blood Devil's inheritance land. In the end, Zhuowen could not resist the temptation of the heavenly soul treasure. After all, heavenly soul treasures were just too rare. Even the house of Marquis Qin probably did not have many of them. How could Zhuowen let go of such a precious item? As for the Blood Devil's inheritance land, although Zhuowen was extremely afraid of it, he also knew that the owner of this bronze coffin had already prepared this Blood Devil token and bronze coffin for him. In fact, it could already be considered as reducing the difficulty of the Blood Devil's inheritance land by a lot. Therefore, Zhuowen decided to take a gamble. After all, Zhuowen had heard of the Blood Devil's inheritance land from Lu Nantian long ago. Even Lu Hantian had almost fallen from this terrifying inheritance. However, if he succeeded in obtaining it, the benefits would be limitless. The path of martial arts is like sailing against the current. If you don't advance, you will fall behind. If you shrink back even a little bit, I'm afraid that your future achievements will not be too high. This time, I will take a good gamble for the Blood Devil's inheritance land. As he spoke, Zhuowen's eyes flashed. He took a step forward, casually took out a dagger, and lightly cut his palm. Immediately, cherry-red blood flowed out from his palm. His bloody palm gently pressed against the bronze coffin, then silently swore to the heavens in his heart that this time, he would definitely enter the Blood Devil's inheritance land. Otherwise, he would be destroyed by the heavens and the Devil's inheritance land. The heavens. After making the oath, a blazing green light burst out from the bronze coffin. Then, the bronze coffin shrank to the size of a palm, quietly lying in Zhuowen's palm. At the same time, the information about how to use the bronze coffin entered Zhuowen's mind. Zhuowen, who had been troubled about how to use the coffin, suddenly felt enlightened after receiving this information. It turned out that this bronze coffin was not an offensive spirit treasure. In a sense, it was an auxiliary heaven-rank spirit treasure. However, its use surprised Zhuowen. The information in his mind introduced the use of the bronze coffin. It could create powerful puppets, and the puppets were completely controlled by Zhuowen. The use of creating puppets didn't seem very eye-catching and was even a little ordinary. However, the puppets created by the bronze coffin weren't those low-level puppets that couldn't even truss up a chicken. Instead, they had a certain level of intelligence and were high-level puppets that were similar to human martial artists. These puppets even had a certain level of human emotions. Of course, this was not what attracted Zhuowen. What attracted Zhuowen was that as long as enough treasures were placed in the bronze coffin, it could even create ultimate emperor stage powerhouses. Moreover, there was no limit to the number of ultimate emperor stage powerhouses. A ultimate emperor stage powerhouse was an existence comparable to the leaders of the 5 superpowers in the prefecture. Aside from the number 1 powerhouse in Muqin County, Lu Nantian, who had stepped into the 4th emperor stage, the other 4 leaders, Xu Chang, Qin Nai, Shenyuan Li, and the master of the meteorite, were all at the peak of the ultimate emperor stage. In other words, if Zhuowen had enough treasures as materials for the bronze coffin, he could use it to create a puppet for a supreme expert like the ultimate emperor realm. With such a puppet, no matter how much Xu Chang hated him, he wouldn't dare to touch him at all. Even the other supergiants would treat him with respect. Kid. This bronze coffin is a heaven-rank spirit treasure. Tell me what it does. Don't just stand there and laugh like an idiot, Xiao Hei said as he knocked Zhuowen's forehead when he saw Zhuowen laughing like an idiot. After regaining his senses, Zhuowen explained the bronze coffin's use to Xiao Hei in detail. Xiao Hei revealed a trace of surprise after he finished listening. It can even create a supreme expert like the ultimate 9 wheels emperor realm. This bronze coffin is indeed impressive. I wonder if it can create 4 puppets at the ultimate 9 wheels emperor realm? Blackie smacked his lips and laughed. That's not very possible. It's said that the strongest puppet is only at the pinnacle level of the 9 wheels emperor realm. If even 4-wheel emperor realm experts, who are strong enough to be conferred the title of Marquis, this bronze coffin is too abnormal. Zhuowen shook his head. After all, the bronze coffin was only a heaven-rank spirit treasure. If a heaven-rank spirit treasure could create fourth emperor stage puppets, then it would be truly heaven-defying. Therefore, the ultimate emperor stage puppets could be considered the peak. Yes, you're right. However, if you want to create a ultimate emperor stage puppet, the resources required would be extremely terrifying, right? What kind of puppets can you create with the resources you have now? Xiaohei suddenly asked. I'm not too sure either. However, apart from being able to create puppets, this bronze coffin's outer shell is also abnormally hard. It can be used as a defensive spirit treasure. Zhuowen shook his head as an awkward expression appeared on his face. With the resources he had accumulated, it was probably impossible for him to create a ultimate emperor stage puppet. However, the owner of the bronze coffin had probably intended for him to use it as a defensive spirit treasure when he gave him the coffin to explore the Blood Devil's land of inheritance. After all, with his wealth, how could he gather so many resources in such a short time to create a ultimate emperor stage puppet? You should have a lot of resources on you. After all, you took the tranquil bags of the enemies you killed in the past. I'm afraid you're planning to bring all those resources back to the Zhuo family, right? However, since you have the bronze coffin now, you can use those resources to create puppets. You can forget about creating a ultimate emperor stage puppet. However, you might be able to create a ultimate emperor stage puppet with 5 wheels. This will definitely be of help to you when you enter the Blood Devil's land of inheritance. Xiaohei looked at Zhuowen with a solemn expression. He knew very well that the 4th floor of the Blood Devil's land of inheritance was extremely terrifying. If Zhuowen was not adequately prepared, the chances of him dying were very high. Hearing this, a trace of hesitation appeared on Zhuowen's face. He gritted his teeth and said, "All right. Then I'll use all those resources. I hope the puppets I create won't disappoint me." As he spoke, Zhuowen suddenly slapped his tranquil bag. Immediately, countless streams of light flew out and entered the bronze coffin. These streams of light included spiritual herbs, spirit treasures, pills, and other items with sufficient energy. However, Zhuowen had no use for them. Originally, Zhuowen had planned to bring these things back to the Zhuo family. However, it seemed that this plan had to be put aside for the time being. Now, he had to increase his strength as soon as possible. After all, after the battle for the Vitality Tower, Xu Chang would not let this matter rest. Clang! When the last stream of light flew out of Zhuowen's tranquil bag and into the bronze coffin, the cyan coffin lid suddenly closed. Soon after, the bronze coffin quietly floated above Zhuowen's head. Zhuowen knew that it would take at least 2 or 3 days to create puppets from the bronze coffin. Therefore, he was not in a hurry. Instead, he silently sat cross-legged on the ground and began to silently cultivate with the help of the rich yuan qi in the surroundings. After all, this was the peak of Zhongling Mountain. The density of yuan qi here was far from what other places could compare to. Zhuowen could use these few days to consolidate his realm and strength. Time gradually passed. In the blink of an eye, 3 days had passed. During these 3 days, many cultivators in the square outside Zhongling Mountain would occasionally focus their gazes on the peak of Zhongling Mountain. They were all guessing when Zhuowen would come down and what benefits Zhuowen would obtain. On the platform, Lu Nantian and the other leaders of the various forces were silently waiting for Zhuowen's appearance. After all, only after Zhuowen came out would they announce the names of the top 100 participants and the opening of the 4th floor of the Vitality Tower. At the peak of Zhongling Mountain, Zhuowen slowly opened his eyes. An imperceptible light flashed in the depths of his eyes. At the same time, an aura surged out from his body like a tide. I never thought that the air at the peak of Zhongling Mountain would actually contain a trace of spirit qi. 3 days have actually allowed me to advance from the late stage to the peak stage of the ultimate emperor realm. Zhuowen could not help but reveal a trace of joy when he sensed the powerful aura bursting out from his body. Rumble. Suddenly, the bronze coffin that had been floating above Zhuowen's head trembled slightly. Then, like a meteor, it directly landed in front of Zhuowen. Creak. The lid of the bronze coffin gently opened, and a black figure slowly walked out, This was a young man around the age of 22. He wore a blue robe, and his shoulder-length hair was casually draped over his back. His face was filled with indifference and dullness. However, Zhuowen felt a threatening aura from this young man. Looks like this is a puppet created by the bronze coffin. It looks very real. It's basically no different from a human. It's much more realistic than the reverse spirit puppet you obtained back then. Xiao He sized up the white-clothed young man before him and clicked his tongue in wonder. It's indeed extremely realistic. Moreover, this puppet's strength is not bad. It actually possesses the strength of an early-stage Ultimate Emperor Realm cultivator. Although this strength is not comparable to Elviatao's, it's not far off. Chapter 531. Bai Lin greetings, Master. The young man in white knelt on the ground with one knee as he stared at Zhuowen with a burning gaze. It was as if in his eyes, Zhuowen was the person he admired the most. It has some spiritual intelligence and its speech is very clear. Xiao He nodded. Obviously, he was quite satisfied with the puppet in front of him. Zhuowen also sized up the puppet in front of him. Other than its somewhat dull expression, the puppet's appearance was almost exactly the same as a human's. If one did not carefully examine it, one would not be able to tell that it was actually a lifeless puppet. From now on, you will be called Bai Lin. This way, it will be easier to call you in the future. Zhuowen casually gave the puppet a name in front of him. Thank you, Master, for giving me a name. Bai Lin heard this and a smile immediately appeared on his face as he cupped his hands. Zhuowen nodded when he heard this. After that, he gestured with his right hand, and Bai Lin was immediately absorbed into the bronze coffin. After that, the bronze coffin returned to the size of a palm and was caught by Zhuowen. Looking around, Zhuowen said softly, since this matter is over, we should leave Zhongling Mountain. Xiao He on the side nodded when he heard this. He immediately turned into a black light and drilled into the depths of Zhuowen's eyebrows. Zhuowen gently took out his identity token and formed a seal with his right hand. Suddenly, a white light enveloped Zhuowen and Zhuowen's figure slowly disappeared. In the square outside Zhongling Mountain, many genius warriors were staring at Zhongling Mountain. They were all waiting for Zhuowen to appear. It's been 3 days. Why hasn't Zhuowen come out yet? Did something happen at the top of the mountain? I'm afraid he got a great benefit at the top of the mountain. After all, the top of Zhongling Mountain is extremely mysterious. It is said that there is a great fortune inside. However, no one has ever gone up, so no one knows what is inside. If there is really a great fortune, Zhuowen will probably get a lot of benefits inside. While many martial artists were complaining, a beam of light shot up from the end of the square, and a slender figure slowly appeared in front of everyone. Swish, swish. The instant this figure appeared in front of everyone, the gazes of everyone in the square gathered on this figure. After which, the entire square became silent because the person who appeared in front of them was Zhuowen, whom they had been waiting for all this while. Feeling the various gazes directed at him, Zhuowen ignored them all. Instead, he casually found a corner in the square and sat down, waiting for the opening of the 4th floor. Brother Zhuo, you're really awesome. You actually surpassed Elviatao and obtained first place in Zhongling Mountain. You even climbed to the peak of Zhongling Mountain and broke the record of Zhongling Mountain for thousands of years. A fervent voice suddenly sounded in Zhuowen's ears. Slightly raising his head, Zhuowen immediately saw Ouyang Hanxian dressed in white. He had an excited expression as he walked in front of Zhuowen. After that, he sat beside Zhuowen without any trace of politeness. Brother Hanxian. Seeing Ouyang Hanxian, Zhuowen's face revealed a trace of a smile. Broken Rock City's Ouyang Hanxian, Ouyang Yuntu, and Qiu Chou had helped him a lot. Although this Ouyang Hanxian was somewhat scheming, he was indeed not bad to him and could be considered one of his few friends. Brother Zhuo, you don't know how wonderful the expressions of the martial artists in the square were when you climbed to the peak of Zhongling Mountain. Even the faces of the 5 super geniuses were even more wonderful. At this moment, Ouyang Hanxian was extremely excited. He kept telling Zhuowen about the expressions of the other martial artists when he climbed Zhongling Mountain. He described it vividly, while Zhuowen sat at the side and listened with a smile. After Ouyang Hanxian finished speaking, Zhuowen asked curiously, "Brother Hanxian, I wonder if you entered the top 100 this time?" Hearing this, Ouyang Hanxuan's face revealed a smug expression. He smiled and said, "I was lucky enough to enter the top 100. I just happened to be ranked 100th. It could be said that it was all due to luck." Zhuowen was slightly surprised. Ouyang Hanxuan's cultivation wasn't high. He was only at the initial stage of the second wheel Extreme Emperor stage. However, he was actually able to enter the top 100 of Zhongling Mountain. It seemed that Ouyang Hanxian had some secrets. However, Zhuowen naturally wouldn't dig into this matter. He just changed the topic at the right time. After all, everyone had their own secrets. For example, Zhuowen had many more secrets than others. It is said that only 5 ancient inheritances will appear on the 4th floor of the Origin Qi Tower. I'm afraid that these 5 ancient inheritances are not fated with us. They should have been dominated by the 5 super geniuses. However, Brother Zhuo, with your potential and strength, you should have the possibility of competing for an ancient inheritance. Ouyang Hanxian sighed slightly. Then, he looked hopefully at Zhuowen in front of him. He knew that others might not be able to compete with the 5 super geniuses, but Zhuowen in front of him was very likely to obtain one of the ancient inheritances. After all, Zhuowen's performance on Zhongling Mountain was too amazing. In addition, even LV Yongsheng had been defeated by Zhuowen. Therefore, other genius warriors had already thought that Zhuowen was the most likely candidate to obtain an inheritance from the 5 super geniuses. That's not necessarily true. The ancient inheritances on the 4th floor rely on one's own opportunities. They may not be obtained by strength. Zhuowen shook his head. However, with his current strength, it wasn't difficult for him to obtain one of the ancient inheritances. However, his goal this time wasn't an ordinary inheritance. It was the most terrifying Blood Devil inheritance. Therefore, he wasn't very interested in the 5 new inheritances that had appeared. Just as Zhuowen was conversing with Ouyang Hanxian, LV Yitao suddenly stood up and walked towards Zhuowen's direction. LV Yitao's actions immediately attracted everyone's attention. However, when they saw that LV Yitao was walking towards Zhuowen's direction, everyone's eyes revealed a strange expression. LV Yitao is actually walking towards Zhuowen. Could it be that he wants to find trouble with Zhuowen? Probably not. After all, there are ancient restrictions on the plaza. Furthermore, LV Nantian and the rest are watching from outside. LV Yitao shouldn't be reckless. Discussions slowly sounded out. Everyone was puzzled by LV Yitao's actions. Zhuowen also sensed something. He raised his head slightly and his gaze immediately fell on LV Yitao, who was walking towards him. He frowned slightly, but he was secretly on guard in his heart. LV Yitao was a genuine ultimate 5-wheel emperor. If this person really wanted to find trouble with him, he would have to use all his strength. He might even be forced to use the puppet by Lin. Ouyang Hanxian, who was beside him, also noticed LV Yitao walking over. His expression was slightly startled, but he still stood firmly beside Zhuowen. He stared at LV Yitao without fear. LV Yitao directly ignored Ouyang Hanxian. Instead, he stared at Zhuowen and said indifferently, "Zhuowen, what is the stone statue on the peak of Zhongling Mountain? Can you tell me?" Hearing this, Zhuowen couldn't help but be stunned. He didn't expect LV Yitao to come and ask him this question. After pondering for a moment, Zhuowen shook his head and said, "There is no stone statue on the peak of the mountain. That stone statue is an illusion in your heart. In other words, the 10,000th step of Zhongling Mountain does not have any pressure. It is just an illusion." Hearing these words, LV Yitao's pupils shrank. He recalled everything that happened when he reached the 10,000th step, as well as the stone statue that looked down at him from the top of the mountain. He finally realized that the one who eliminated him was himself. Just as Zhuowen had said, the 10,000th step didn't have any pressure. It was just an illusion that entered one's heart. If his heart wasn't in chaos at that time, the 10,000th step would have been broken by itself. However, his heart was in chaos at that time. He knew that if his heart wasn't in chaos at that time, the one who would reach the top of the mountain would be him and not Zhuowen in front of him. Actually, you could have one, but you lost to yourself in the end. Zhuowen shook his head and said meaningfully. Others might not understand this sentence, but Elviatao understood it. His indifferent face couldn't help but reveal a trace of bitterness. Zhuowen, a loss is a loss. After all, the one who reached the top of the mountain was you and not me. It's useless to regret now. Moreover, to be able to force me to that point, your heart is very strong and I admire it very much. When your strength increases a little, I will find you to compete again. Taking a deep look at Zhuowen, Elviatao slowly turned around and returned to his place. Not far away, Xu Tianliang, who originally wanted to watch a good show, had a disappointed expression on his face. He thought that Elviatao would teach Zhuowen a lesson. In the end, he was happy for nothing. Forget it. When we enter the 4th floor, we can also teach this little bastard a lesson. Xu Tianliang muttered hatefully. On the other hand, Zhuowen silently looked at Elviatao in the distance, a thoughtful look on his face. Just now, when Elviatao left, he sent me a message. You have to be careful of Xu Tianliang and Zhu Kai Luoxing just told me that these two people will probably harm you in the 4th floor. Although your potential is very strong, your strength is still not enough. If you want to save your life, it's best to avoid those two people. This Elviatao's temperament is very good. He's not like his second and third brothers, who are full of evil tricks and seek revenge for the smallest grievance. He has the demeanor of a gentleman. Xiao Hei's voice suddenly sounded in his mind. Her words couldn't hide her admiration for Elviatao. Zhuowen also nodded. It seemed that this Elviatao was able to become the #1 genius of Muqin County not by chance. This person's talent and temperament could be considered to be the best choice. His future achievements would definitely be limitless. However, since Xu Tianliang and Zhu Kai want to harm me, then when we enter the 4th floor, don't blame me for being ruthless. As he spoke, Zhuowen tilted his head slightly. His gaze immediately focused on Xu Tianliang, who had a gloomy expression, and Zhu Kai, who had an indifferent expression. Putting aside Zhu Kai for the time being, Zhuowen would definitely settle old scores with Xu Tianliang. Chapter 532. Ancient ruins. The crowd in the square did not have to wait for long before a vast and solemn voice resounded through the sky like a tide. They knew that Lu Nantian had finally spoken. Congratulations to those who have entered the top 100. You now have the qualifications to enter the 4th floor of the Origin Qi Tower. As soon as these words were spoken, those who entered the top 100 revealed excited expressions. As for those who did not enter the top 100, their faces were gloomy. The 4th floor of the Origin Qi Tower is filled with ancient ruins. There are many treasures left behind from ancient times in those ruins. If you have the strength and opportunity, you can even obtain rare treasures like the Heavenly Soul Treasure. As for the place where the ancient inheritance is located, it is at the end of the 4th floor. There is a huge land of inheritance there. If you want to enter the land of inheritance, you must obtain the corresponding key. This key is hidden in the ancient ruins outside the land of inheritance. Let me make it clear that there are only a total of 10 keys. Therefore, only 10 people are qualified to enter the land of inheritance. There will be 5 ancient inheritances that are open to the public. Of course, in addition to these 5, there is also an inheritance that has always been open to the public. That is the Blood Demon inheritance. However, this old man has a word of advice for you. The process of inheriting the Blood Demon inheritance is extremely terrifying. If you are unable to inherit it successfully, you will undoubtedly die. Therefore, if you do not have a certain level of strength, it is best not to choose the Blood Demon inheritance. Moreover, in my opinion, among the 100 of you, I am afraid that not one will be able to successfully obtain the Blood Demon inheritance. Therefore, it is best to act according to your strength. As soon as these words were spoken, the crowd in the square burst into an uproar. They had naturally heard of the terror of the Blood Demon inheritance. At the same time, the Blood Demon inheritance was considered the strongest inheritance in the land of inheritance. It was the highest inheritance that surpassed the other inheritances. Once one obtained the Blood Demon inheritance, it would not be a problem for them to enter the Four Sovereigns realm in the future. They might even be able to peek into the Supreme Sovereign realm. With such strength, they would be able to stand on equal footing with the Azure Emperor of the Azure Mystic Empire. Everyone was extremely clear about the importance of the inheritance. This was because the ancient inheritance did not only contain secret martial arts manuals, but also the accumulated experience of generations. After all, the inheritance condensed all the essence of the ancient sect. Obtaining the inheritance also meant obtaining the accumulated results of generations of ancient sects. It went without saying how precious such results were to a cultivator. It was precisely because of this reason that ancient inheritances possessed such a strong allure, causing countless geniuses to fight for them. And the more powerful an ancient inheritance was, the more terrifying it would be for a cultivator. And the Blood Demon inheritance, which was known as the #1 inheritance in the Land of Inheritance, was undoubtedly the inheritance that gave the greatest boost to a cultivator. However, the Blood Devil's inheritance was infamous. Although the Blood Devil's inheritance was tempting enough, many people knew their limits. Therefore, they didn't plan to place their attention on it. After hearing Lu Nantian's last sentence, the indifferent Lu Nantian clenched his fists slightly. He knew that Lu Nantian's words were meant for himself. Do what you can. Lu Yitao's eyes flickered, but he still sighed in the end. He knew how much Lu Nantian expected of him. After all, the War of the 9 Counties was about to begin. If something happened to him because of the Blood Devil's inheritance, this War of the 9 Counties would probably be the same as the previous one. In the previous War of the Origin Qi Tower, Lu Hantian, the #1 genius of Muqin County, stubbornly chose the Blood Devil's inheritance. In the end, he failed and died, leaving the other geniuses of Muqin County without a leader. Therefore, Muqin County lost miserably that time. If Lu Yitao entered the 4th floor this time and chose the Blood Devil's inheritance like Lu Hantian, he would most likely end up in a disaster. At that time, the War of the 9 Counties would very likely repeat the previous fiasco. Therefore, Lu Nantian said to do what you can. Forget it. Right now, I need to focus on the big picture. Shaking his head, Lu Yitao also had no confidence in the Blood Devil's inheritance. After all, Lu Hantian died because of it, so he naturally didn't have much confidence. However, I wonder if Zhuoan can successfully pass the trial inside and obtain the inheritance if he enters the Blood Devil's inheritance. Thinking of this, Lu Yitao couldn't help but look at Zhuoan, who was not far away. He knew that Zhuoan was not simple to be able to reach the peak of Zhongling Mountain. Even he couldn't see through the former, so he couldn't help but think that Zhuoan might be able to pass the Blood Devil's inheritance. However, he quickly threw away this unrealistic idea. Although Zhuoan reached the peak of Zhongling Mountain, it only meant that this child had extremely high potential. However, his strength was too weak. Entering the Blood Devil's inheritance was simply courting death. I really don't know which monstrous cultivator will obtain the Blood Devil's inheritance on the 4th floor, or if no one will ever be qualified to obtain it. In the sky, Lu Nantian's voice was silent for a while before it resounded again. If no one has any objections, then this lord will now open the entrance to the 4th floor of the Origin Qi Tower for all of you. Just as LV Nantian's voice fell, thick white light pillars sprinkled down from the distant horizon. There were more than 100 pillars of light that were like pillars that supported the heavens. They enveloped a portion of the martial artists in the square, and the martial artists that were enveloped were undoubtedly the top 100 geniuses. The other cultivators in the square who weren't enveloped by the light pillars looked at the figures in the light pillars with envy. They all knew that the true opportunity of the Origin Qi Tower was on the 4th floor. After all, the 4th floor of the Yuan Qi Tower contained an endless amount of ancient ruins. Even if those in the top 100 could not compete for 5 ancient inheritances, the treasures in the ancient ruins were all extremely valuable and powerful. Even obtaining one of them would greatly increase one's strength. This time, 5 new ancient inheritances will appear on the 4th floor of the Origin Qi Tower. I wonder which 5 will obtain these 5 ancient inheritances. It should be the 5 super geniuses. After all, the ancient inheritances that appear every time the Origin Chi Tower battle appear, they are basically divided among the geniuses of the 5 superforces. That's true, but that Zhuowen also has a very good chance of obtaining one of the ancient inheritances. After all, his performance on Zhongling Mountain was too amazing. Not necessarily. That Zhuowen's performance on Zhongling Mountain was so eye-catching, it can only mean that his potential is very strong. However, his strength is only around the Ultimate Emperor stage. There is still a certain gap between him and the 5 super geniuses. The beam of light on the square flashed, and the 100 geniuses disappeared from the square in an instant. The rest of the warriors on the square naturally began to discuss without restraint. Of course, their most fervent topic was naturally the ownership of the 5 ancient inheritances in the Land of Inheritance. Although Zhuowen's performance on Zhongling Mountain was very amazing, no one was very optimistic about him. After all, Zhongling Mountain not only tested one's strength, but also one's potential. Obviously, the fact that Zhuowen could reach the peak meant that his potential was limitless. With Zhuowen's potential, as long as he was given enough time, surpassing the 5 super geniuses wouldn't be a problem. However, Zhuowen's strength was still too weak. Compared to the other 5 super geniuses, he was still lacking by a large margin. Of course, discussions were just discussions. If these people knew Zhuowen's true strength, they probably wouldn't be so unconfident about Zhuowen. After all 365 acupoints in Zhuowen's body had been opened. The nirvana of the Great Sun had reached the beginner level, and the strength of his body had reached an unparalleled level. His strength was comparable to that of an Ultimate Emperor stage expert. Even an ordinary Ultimate Emperor stage expert might not necessarily be a match for Zhuowen. Among the 5 super geniuses, Xu Tianliang and Qin Batian were the weakest. They were both at the peak of the Ultimate Emperor stage. Zhu Kai was slightly more difficult to deal with as he was at the early stage of the Ultimate Emperor stage. However, with the strength of Zhuowen's body, he didn't fear the 3 of them at all. In fact, if they were to fight, Zhuowen's chances of victory were very high. However, Luo Xing and Elvia Tao were 2 super geniuses. Zhuowen was probably much more difficult to deal with. It was said that Luo Xing was already at the peak of the Ultimate Emperor stage. If Zhuowen only relied on the strength of his body, he probably wouldn't be a match for Luo Xing. However, if he added in some of his trump cards, he might be able to fight evenly with Luo Xing. On the other hand, the number 1 genius of Muqin County, Elvia Tao, had already reached the peak of the Ultimate Emperor stage. If Zhuowen didn't take out the Heaven-tier spirit treasure, the bronze coffin, he probably wouldn't be able to resist Elvia Tao at all. However, the bronze coffin was Zhuowen's final trump card, so Zhuowen wouldn't reveal it too early. With Elvia Tao's attitude, he probably wouldn't lower himself to deal with Zhuowen. Of course, even if he had to deal with Zhuowen, Zhuowen wouldn't be afraid. Zhuowen only saw a white light flash before his eyes as a trace of dizziness flashed through his mind. When he gradually recovered, Zhuowen discovered that he was no longer in the plaza on the 3rd floor. This was a small, barren hill. Within a radius of 10 miles around the small hill, there was a transparent, oval-shaped barrier of light. Outside the barrier of light was an endless wasteland, which seemed to be filled with vicissitudes and ancientness. At this moment, on the small hill, a beam of light flashed. The other cultivators were also teleported in by the beam of light. They were all rubbing their heads, their faces confused and puzzled. Obviously, they weren't used to the unfamiliar environment around them. This should be the 4th floor of the Origin Chi Tower, Zhuowen muttered to himself as he looked around at the barren environment. Brother Zhuo. At this moment, the white-clothed Ouyang Hanxian was also teleported in. He hurriedly came to Zhuowen's side. Here, he only knew Zhuowen. Moreover, Zhuowen was stronger than him. Being with Zhuowen was at least much safer than being alone. After all, the 4th floor of the Origin Chi Tower was no longer restricted by the ancient restrictions and rules. It was hard to guarantee that there wouldn't be some cultivators with bad intentions who wanted to rob the Chenkuan bags from other cultivators. Chapter 533. Trouble. Slightly nodding his head towards Ouyang Hanxian, Zhuo Wen's eyes narrowed as he gazed at the outside environment through the light barrier. He discovered that there were still a few sparse buildings on the endless wasteland outside. However, those buildings looked extremely dilapidated. It looked like a scene of decay after a war. It was not difficult to guess that a long time ago, an extremely tragic war had taken place on this wasteland. Ouyang Hanxian also noticed Zhuo Wen's line of sight. His gaze also landed on the dilapidated buildings in the distance. With a smile, he said, "Those dilapidated buildings should be the remnants of the ancient times. These remnants of the ancient times are basically like this, extremely dilapidated. Ancient ruins?" Hearing this, Zhuo Wen's eyes lit up. If the ancient ruins were relatively intact, there would be good things inside. Now, Zhuo Wen was extremely short of resources. If he could obtain enough resources from these ancient ruins, he was afraid that he could rely on the bronze coffin to raise Bai Lin's strength to the ultimate nine-wheel emperor realm. Once Bai Lin's strength reached the ultimate nine-wheel emperor realm, Zhuo Wen would not be afraid of the revenge of the Marquis of Baichuan's mansion. At this time, the 100 warriors on the small hill had basically all arrived. These warriors were close friends or disciples of the same force. They gathered in groups of 3 or 5, divided into small groups. "Zhuo Wen, you have to be careful of Xu Tianliang and Zhu Kai. I'm afraid they will do you harm. If you can join the team of our Jade Lady Star Court. With the strength of our Jade Lady Star Court, Xu Tianliang and Zhu Kai will not easily touch you." While Zhuo Wen was silently observing the surrounding environment, a clear and melodious voice slowly rang in his ears. Slightly startled, Zhuo Wen slightly raised his head and immediately saw Qing Lian, who was in the team of Jade Lady Star Court, not far away, looking at him with concern. Looking at the concerned expression on Qing Lian's face, Zhuo Wen felt a little warm in his heart. He nodded at her and replied with a sound transmission, "Miss Qing Lian, thank you for your kindness. I have my ways to deal with Xu Tianliang and Zhu Kai." Hearing Zhuo Wen's words, Qing Lian knew that Zhuo Wen probably had a backup plan. Therefore, she wasn't worried. After all, she had seen the various records that Zhuo Wen had created along the way. Therefore, she still believed in Zhuo Wen's strength. "Don't call me Miss Qing Lian in the future. Just call me Qing Lian. After all, we are considered friends." After hesitating for a while, Qing Lian suddenly shyly transmitted her voice. On the elegant face of Qing Lian, who was in the team of Jade Lady Star Court, there was a rare touch of shyness, like a lotus flower emerging from the water. Zhuo Wen naturally saw Qing Lian's unusual behavior. He hesitated for a moment and said, "Since that's the case, I'll directly call you Qing Lian in the future. After all, you treat me as a friend, so I, Zhuo Wen, will naturally treat you as a friend. You have to be careful in the ancient ruins this time." I will." Seeing that Zhuo Wen really called her by her name, Qing Lian was overjoyed and the corners of her mouth bloomed into a sweet smile. However, Zhuo Wen did not see any of this because when he was talking to Qing Lian, 2 malicious gazes were fixed on his back, causing the hairs on his back to stand on end. Tilting his head slightly, Zhuo Wen immediately saw that not far behind him, the owners of these 2 gazes were Xu Tianliang and Zhu Kai. At this moment, the 2 of them had quite a number of subordinates beside them. Basically, they were all disciples of the House of Marquis Baichuan and the House of the Imperial Sword. After all, the 5 great super-factions were the 5 strongest factions in Muqin County. They produced many geniuses. Hence, the 5 great factions occupied nearly half of the top 100 spots this time around. On average, 10 people from each of the 5 great factions had entered the 4th level. "Zhuo Wen, this time, you won't be able to escape even if you have wings. After the seal outside the small hill is broken, it will be the time of your death. Cherish your last moments." Xu Tianliang's gaze was cold. He brought the 20 people behind him and directly came in front of Zhuo Wen. His gaze was condescending as he stared at Zhuo Wen. Zhu Kai stood beside Xu Tianliang with his hands crossed in front of his chest. With a cold expression, he said, "Zhuo Wen, actually, I, Zhu Kai, have no interest in intervening in the grudge between you and Xu Tianliang. If you give me your Chenkuan bag, then I won't intervene in the grudge between you and Xu Tianliang. How about it? Brother Zhu, you Didn't we agree on this? Zhu Kai's words immediately caused Xu Tianliang's expression to change slightly. He had clearly discussed with Zhu Kai that they would join hands to kill Zhuowen after entering the 4th level. After that, they would split the items in Zhuowen's Chenkuan bag equally. However, Zhu Kai's words immediately caused Xu Tianliang's expression to become extremely ugly. He. Brother Xu, don't forget that I'm helping you because of this kid's Chenkuan bag. If this kid knows what's good for him and hands over his Chenkuan bag, then I naturally don't need to fight with him. After all, I'm in a hurry to go to the ancient ruins to find the key. Zhu Kai coldly snorted. His face did not have the slightest bit of shame for breaking the agreement. Instead, he had a natural expression. Moreover, he was not stupid. Since Xu Tianliang hated Zhuowen so much, it was obvious that there was no small grudge between them. He would not be used as a tool for others. Hearing this, Xu Tianliang coldly snorted. His gaze was fixed on Zhuowen. He believed that Zhuowen would not easily agree to give his Chenkuan bag to Zhu Kai. Once he did not agree, Zhu Kai would still join hands with him to kill this Zhuowen in the end. However, Zhuowen shook his head and coldly said, "Who do you think you are? Why should I give my Chenkuan bag to you? If your Imperial Sword Gate's leader, Shen Yuanli, came to ask for my Chenkuan bag, perhaps I would give it to him. But who do you think you are?" When these words came out, the surroundings suddenly became silent. Soon after, many people stared at Zhuowen in astonishment. They did not expect that Zhuowen's temper would be so bad. He actually did not give Zhu Kai any face. At this moment, Zhu Kai's face was extremely gloomy. Originally, he did not plan to kill Zhuowen. He only wanted Zhuowen to hand over his Chenkuan bag. Then, they would naturally not care about the matter between him and Xu Tianliang. However, now that Zhuowen said this, the coldness in his heart became even more intense. A trace of killing intent gradually appeared in his heart towards Zhuowen. As the #1 genius of the Imperial Sword Gate, who would not be respectful towards him? Who would not give him any face like Zhuowen? This almost made Zhu Kai's lungs explode. Sure enough, you have guts. Originally, Brother Xu said that you were arrogant and conceited. I did not believe it. After all, you are only a lowly person from a low-level city. What confidence do you have to be so arrogant and conceited? But now, I believe it. An incomparably arrogant brat like you usually ends up in a very miserable state. Zhu Kai coldly said. Xu Tianliang's eyes lit up when he saw that Zhuowen was truly angered. He secretly cursed Zhuowen for being brainless. He was actually so arrogant that he did not even take Zhu Kai seriously. After all, Zhu Kai was slightly stronger than him. Even he did not dare to speak so rudely to him. The conflict between Zhuowen and Xu Tianliang and Zhu Kai also attracted the attention of the others on the hill. Gazes immediately gathered on Zhuowen, Xu Tianliang, and the others. Their gazes were filled with mockery. Xu Tianliang and Zhu Kai have actually made trouble for Zhuowen. Looks like Zhuowen is in for it. Zhuowen is alone. Although his performance at Zhongling Mountain was eye-catching, his strength is only at the 3-wheel Ultimate Emperor realm. If he offends Xu Tianliang and Zhu Kai at the same time, he is basically finished. The surrounding people whispered. They looked at Zhuowen with pity, worry, and schadenfreude. However, most of them silently mourned for Zhuowen. After all, Zhuowen's strength was not high. Facing Xu Tianliang and Zhu Kai was simply courting death. Luo Xing, Qing Lian, and Elvia Tao, who were not far away, also noticed the strange situation on Zhuowen's side. They all frowned slightly. Senior sister Luo Xing, you must help Zhuowen this time. If you don't help, don't stop me. Qing Lian's beautiful eyes were filled with determination as she whispered to Qing Lian. Hearing this, Luo Xing sighed softly and said, "Don't worry. I will help this time. After all, Zhuowen saved your and Honglian's lives in the dark forest. It is time to repay this favor." As she spoke, Luo Xing led the team of Jade Lady Astral Court slowly to where Zhuowen was. Hey! The people of Jade Lady Astral Court are also here. Do they also want to deal with Zhuowen? When Luo Xing led the team to where Luo Xing was, many of the surrounding people were surprised. Luo Xing, could it be that you want to protect Zhuo Wen? You have to know that if you want to protect Zhuowen, it means that you have to go against the two super forces of Marquis House of Baichuan and ruling sword school. Seeing Luo Xing leading the team to Zhuowen's side, Xu Tianliang's eyelids twitched and he said in a timid voice. Zhu Kai's face also turned ugly. Especially when he looked at Luo Xing, his eyes were filled with coldness. This Zhuo Wen once saved a disciple of our Jade Lady Astral Court. Jade Lady Astral Court owes him a favor, so I hope you two can give me face and let Zhuo Wen go. Luo Xing's face was indifferent. Her voice was clear and melodious. Many warriors present showed a touch of infatuation after hearing her melodious voice. On the other hand, Zhuo Wen glanced at Luo Xing in surprise. He never expected Luo Xing to help him for the first time. He remembered that Luo Xing didn't seem to care at all when the everlasting old man attacked him. However, after seeing Qinglian sticking her tongue out at him beside Luo Xing, he knew that Luo Xing's help was mostly due to Qinglian. Luo Xing, are you really going to help Zhuowen? Zhu Kai suddenly took a step forward as he stared at Luo Xing with bloodshot eyes. A terrifying aura overflowed from his body as if there was a ferocious beast hidden in his body. Luo Xing frowned. She knew that Zhu Kai had been holding a grudge against her for snatching the title of the second genius, but she did not expect that Zhu Kai would want to attack her. However, Luo Xing was not afraid. After all, she was very clear about the difference in strength between her and Zhu Kai. If they really fought, Zhu Kai would not gain the slightest advantage. Chapter 534. Falling Star Sect. Just when the atmosphere on the hill was at its peak, clear footsteps slowly sounded. LV Atao, dressed in a white robe, slowly walked over with an indifferent expression. Zhu Kai, let's end this here. Although you can fight freely on the 4th floor of the Tower of Vitality, we haven't even entered the ancient ruins yet. Aren't you afraid of Father's reprimand? LV Atao paused beside Luo Xing. His eyes narrowed as he stared at Zhu Kai, whose eyes were red and whose aura was boiling. An aura that was many times stronger than Zhu Kai's slowly flowed out and instantly suppressed Zhu Kai. Feeling the aura from LV Atao's body, Zhu Kai's pupils shrank. He coldly snorted and withdrew the aura from his body. He glanced at LV Atao with fear, then stared at Zhuo Wen and coldly said, Zhuowen, you can only hide behind a woman. You're just a coward. Zhuo Wen could not be bothered with Zhu Kai's low-level provocation. Instead, he glanced at LV Atao with some surprise. He did not expect that LV Atao would actually step forward. This was something he did not expect. It seems that this battle is not going to happen. Zhuowen secretly shook his head and felt a little regretful. With his current strength, he was not afraid of Xu Tianliang and Zhu Kai joining forces. He originally wanted to teach Xu Tianliang and Zhu Kai a lesson, but now it seemed that it was impossible. Zhuowen, take care of your dog life. If you meet us in the ancient ruins, I will personally take your dog life. After Zhu Kai left these words coldly, he directly left the hill with the disciples of the Imperial Sword Sect. He also knew that even LV Atao had come forward. Killing Zhuowen now was simply a pipe dream. The most important thing now was to hurry up and find the key to the land of inheritance in the ancient ruins. He didn't need to spend all his energy on Zhuowen. After all, he had plenty of time. Xu Tianliang glared hatefully at Zhuowen and led the people of Marquis House of Baichuan away from the small hill, heading straight for the scattered ruins in the distance. With Xu Tianliang and Zhu Kai's two groups taking the lead, the other groups of ancient martial artists on the small hill all revealed a blazing expression on their faces. They all used their movement techniques and rushed towards the distant remains. Although they were not as strong as the 5 super geniuses, the key to the land of inheritance was not something that could be found by relying on strength. It still depended on one's own luck. In an instant, almost half of the cultivators in the small hill had left, and the originally bustling small hill now seemed quite deserted. Sister Luoxing, Zhuowen, it's time for me to leave as well. I wish you good luck and hope that you can obtain the key. As he said, LV Atao's gaze suddenly landed on Zhuowen and he said, Zhuowen, I hope you can quickly improve your strength. When the time comes, I will compete with you again. LV Itao stood tall and faintly cupped his hands in obeisance to Zhuowen, Luoxing, and the others. He also led the people of the house of Marquis Qin away from the small hill. Zhuowen. It's rare for Brother LV to stand up for someone. It seems that he really regards you as his opponent. I'm afraid that when your strength increases, Brother LV will really find you to compete with. Luoxing's beautiful eyes flashed slightly as she stared at Zhuowen. The corners of her mouth revealed a faint smile. It was as beautiful as 100 flowers blooming. Ouyang Hanxian, who was beside Zhuowen, stared with his eyes wide open. Even Zhuowen could not help but be slightly taken aback by Luoxing's alluring smile. Luoxing was indeed worthy of being the #1 beauty in the province. Her every frown and smile carried a peerless charm. In terms of temperament and appearance, perhaps only Mu Chenxue, whom he had met in the ancient cavern, could compete with her. Thinking of Mu Chenxue, Zhuowen's gaze gradually blurred. This time, he could be considered to have completely obtained a place in the top 100 of the Tower of Vitality. He was already qualified to participate in the Battle of the 9 Counties. He was also one step closer to seeing Mu Chenxue. Mu Chenxue. Wait for me. In the Battle of the 9 Counties, I, Zhuowen, will definitely fight for the opportunity to be conferred the title of Marquis. Only a Marquis has the qualifications to participate in the entrance examination of Jioshan Academy. Slightly clenching his fist, the blurred look in Zhuowen's eyes gradually disappeared and was replaced by a touch of determination. More than 2 years had passed since they parted in the ancient cavern. Zhuowen had also gradually grown from a tender youth to a robust youth. In these 2 years, Zhuowen had not forgotten the promise he had made with Mu Chenxue. Instead, his yearning for her had become even more intense. Even now, Zhuowen could not wait to go to Jioshan Academy to see Mu Chenxue. However, he also knew that Jioshan Academy was after all the second greatest power in the Eastern lands. In front of such a power, the Qingxian Empire was an ant-like existence. If he went with his current strength, he did not even have the qualifications to enter Jioshan Academy, let alone see Mu Chenxue. It was precisely because of this reason that Zhuowen had desperately cultivated for the past 2 years, and had even suffered countless hardships. It was because in his heart, there had always been a beautiful figure that he was concerned about and missed. Zhuowen's sudden absent-mindedness made the corners of Luoxing's mouth curl into a faint smile. Obviously, she thought that Zhuowen's absent-mindedness was because of her sweet smile. Shaking her head, Luoxing said softly, "Young Master Zhuo, we also have to leave. I wish you all good luck." Nodding lightly, Luoxing led the people of Jade Ladystar Court and left. Not long after Luoxing and the others left, Zhuowen took a deep breath and said to Ouyang Hanxian beside him, "Brother Hanxian, let's go. If we can find the 2 keys this time, we will be qualified to enter the land of inheritance." Unexpectedly, Ouyang Hanxian shook his head and said with a bitter smile, "Brother Zhuo, my strength is too weak. Even if I find the keys, I don't plan to enter the land of inheritance. After all, with my strength, I'm afraid that I won't be able to return alive if I enter that place." Ouyang Hanxian was quite self-aware. This time, he entered the ancient ruins with the intention of finding some powerful treasures. As for the ancient inheritance, it was too far away for him. Hearing this, Zhuowen also nodded. Ouyang Hanxian's words made sense. His strength was indeed a little weak. Entering the land of inheritance would definitely do more harm than good to Ouyang Hanxian. "When we enter the ancient ruins, I will help you get some treasures. This way, you won't have come in vain." After pondering for a while, Zhuowen decided to get some treasures for Ouyang Hanxian. After all, Zhuowen and Ouyang Yuntu had helped him a lot. Such kindness naturally had to be repaid by Ouyang Hanxian. Moreover, Ouyang Hanxian had treated him sincerely, so it was understandable that Zhuowen would help Ouyang Hanxian. "Let's go." With that, Zhuowen and Ouyang Hanxian suddenly turned into 2 streamers and rushed toward the ruins in the distance. Swoosh, swoosh. 2 ear-piercing sounds suddenly sounded. Zhuowen and Ouyang Hanxian suddenly stopped in front of a huge building. This building was extremely dilapidated. However, from the dilapidated traces, Zhuowen could still see that this building was once an extremely magnificent hall. In front of this dilapidated hall, there was a stone arch that was dozens of feet high. However, only half of this stone arch remained. There were a few vague words engraved above the stone arch: Falling Star Sect. Looking at the vague words, Zhuowen muttered. Obviously, this dilapidated hall should be the ruins of a sect called Falling Star Sect in the ancient times. At this time, in the dilapidated hall in front, there were already a few people who were constantly searching inside. Obviously, they were all trying their luck to see if they could find treasures in this hall. This Falling Star Sect looks quite magnificent. However, it is a pity that it has become so dilapidated now. Standing outside the door and looking at the sect ruins in front of him, Ouyang Hanxian could not help but sigh. Sometimes, the power of time was really terrifying. No matter how glorious it was in the past, with the passage of time, the glory would eventually become a thing of the past. Let's go in and take a look. Maybe we can find some useful clues inside. Zhuowen sighed and nodded. Then, he led Ouyang Hanxian directly into the hall. The arrival of Zhuowen and Ouyang Hanxian also attracted the attention of the rest of the people in the hall. When they saw Zhuowen, they all revealed a trace of fear. Zhuowen's performance on Zhongling Mountain was so amazing. Now, these genius warriors who had entered the 4th level could all recognize Zhuowen. Moreover, although in their opinion, Zhuowen's strength was not as good as the 5 superforces, it was actually not too far apart. After all, Zhuowen was a genuine ultimate 3-wheel emperor. Such a cultivation was enough to instantly kill any warrior except the 5 super geniuses. Zhuowen also felt the vigilance of the others in the hall. He shook his head and ignored those nervous warriors. Instead, he directly led Ouyang Hanxian into the depths of the hall. It had to be said that this hall was really dilapidated. Along the way, there was basically no place that was intact. Looking at these dilapidated scenes, Zhuowen really had some doubts. Would such a hall really have the so-called treasures? Hey! There seems to be a situation ahead. Let's go and take a look. Suddenly, Zhuowen let out a soft cry of surprise. Just now, when he was walking, Xiao He in his sea of consciousness suddenly mentioned that there seemed to be some movement ahead. Therefore, Zhuowen immediately became vigilant and began to slowly walk forward. When Ouyang Hanxian saw Zhuowen's vigilant appearance, he was a little puzzled. However, he did not mind and also followed behind Zhuowen vigilantly. After all, Zhuowen's strength was much stronger than his. Following him would naturally be more secure. At the end of the hall, there was a tunnel on the left. The tunnel's location was extremely remote. If not for Xiao He's reminder, Zhuowen really would not have noticed this remote tunnel. On the other hand, Ouyang Hanxian looked at Zhuowen in surprise. This tunnel was so remote, but it was actually discovered by Zhuowen in advance. In his heart, he naturally believed in Zhuowen even more. Let's go in. Who knows, there might be something good inside. Chapter 535. Space Stone Tablet. The passageway was dark and gloomy. Gusts of cold wind constantly whistled through the narrow passageway, sounding exceptionally horrifying. Zhuowen's performance was still alright, but Ouyang Hanxian's expression was somewhat unnatural. However, when he thought of Zhuowen's powerful strength, he felt a lot more at ease. Look, there's a light source in front. I'm afraid we're almost at the exit. Ouyang Hanxian suddenly pointed to the front and shouted excitedly. Hearing this, Zhuowen's gaze also focused in front. Indeed, at the end of the tunnel, there was a rather dazzling white light. Let's go. Let's go over and take a look. Nodding his head, Zhuowen immediately brought Ouyang Hanxian and slowly approached the light source in front. His expression was still filled with caution. After all, this place was the interior of an ancient sect. Although time had passed and most of it had already become extremely dilapidated, no one knew whether or not there was still some kind of powerful mechanism or restriction inside. Therefore, it was better to be careful. Within 100 steps of the light source, Zhuowen's ears moved slightly. He could actually faintly hear the sound of metal clashing and scolding. He couldn't help but be slightly startled. There was someone at the exit of the tunnel? This was a thought that flashed through Zhuowen's mind. Ouyang Hanxian, who was beside him, obviously also noticed the abnormality. His gaze was fixed on Zhuowen, as if he was following Zhuowen's lead. "Brother Zhuo, what should we do now?" Ouyang Hanxian couldn't help but ask softly. "You stay here first, I'll go over and take a look. If the situation is critical, you should escape first. After all, the ancient ruins are filled with danger. If you're with me, I might not be able to take care of you," Zhuowen cautiously instructed. Ouyang Hanxian hesitated for a moment, gritted his teeth and said, "All right. However, you should be careful. Your life is the most important thing." Nodding his head, Zhuowen carefully walked towards the exit. Outside the light source, there was a rather majestic inner hall. Inside the hall, there were many tall stone statues, as if they were dutifully guarding the hall. At the front of the hall, there was a stone tablet. The stone tablet was about 3 feet tall. Compared to the surrounding stone statues, it was much shorter. However, the stone tablet emitted a strange and powerful aura. What surprised Zhuo even more was that the center of the stone tablet was actually split open with a whirlpool-like black hole. It was as if there was an unknown space on the other side of the black hole. This stone tablet. His gaze focused on the stone tablet, Zhuowen's eyebrows furrowed. He could feel that the stone tablet was unusual. Boy. That is, the space stone tablet, the stone tablet. The space is of the space of many times, the space is of space. Usually, this kind of space stone tablet is basically used by those ancient sects to store the treasures in the sect, and this space stone tablet should be falling star sects. Suddenly, Xiao Hei's voice rang out in Zhuowen's mind without warning. It almost gave Zhuowen a fright. Space. That means there must be something good inside. Hearing these words, Zhuowen's eyes suddenly flashed a glimmer of light. According to Xiao Hei, the space stone tablet was the place where the falling star sect stored the treasures. After all, the falling star sect was one of the ancient sects. There must be a lot of treasures. Perhaps, there were also a lot of treasures in the space stone tablet. Theoretically, it is true. However, looking at the appearance of the space stone tablet, it seems that it has been opened by someone. I am afraid that most of the treasures inside have been taken away. Xiao Hei's eyes were like torches. At a glance, she could see that the space stone tablet in front of them had been opened by someone. Zhuowen's eyes also showed a touch of disappointment when he heard this. He knew that if the space stone tablet had been opened by someone, it would be impossible for him to take the things inside. They would have been taken away by someone else. No. There is a layer of restriction outside the space stone tablet. If the space stone tablet was taken away by someone else, it is impossible to set a restriction outside. Maybe the person who opened the space stone tablet was someone from the falling star sect. Suddenly, Xiao Hei seemed to have noticed something and said. Hearing this, Zhuowen also noticed that there was a layer of restriction outside the space stone tablet. He nodded slightly. He knew that if someone opened the space stone tablet, it was impossible to set a restriction outside. Therefore, it must have been set up by someone from the falling star sect. Since the restriction was set up, there must be some treasures in the space stone tablet. Thinking of this possibility, Zhuowen was relieved. Now he was in short supply of resources and treasures. After all, if he wanted to use the bronze coffin to raise the strength of the puppet Bai Lin to the ultimate 9-wheel emperor realm, he would have to spend an endless amount of resources. Since the last time he created Bai Lin, Zhuowen's resources had been exhausted. Therefore, entering the ancient ruins this time was an opportunity for Zhuowen. As long as he found enough resources, it was possible to speed up the increase of Bai Lin's strength. The more powerful Bai Lin was, the greater his chances of entering the Blood Demon's legacy land. Zhuowen's gaze quickly fell on the center of the palace. There were 10 people facing off against each other, and they were clearly divided into 2 factions. One of the factions was led by a bald young man, and there were 7 people in total. All of them had powerful auras, and they were evidently not weak. The bald young man's aura was the most powerful, and he was at the early stage of the ultimate 3-wheel emperor realm. The other faction had fewer people, and the leader was a heroic-looking woman. Her aura was not weak either, and she was also at the early stage of the ultimate three-wheel emperor realm. However, this woman's condition was not very good, and there was a greenish-black color on her face. Evidently, she had been poisoned. From their clothes, Zhuo Wen could immediately tell that the 7 people were from the Marquis Baichuan's residence, and the heroic-looking woman at the head of the group was Ling Tian City's number 1 genius, Ling Wushuang. Zhuo Wen had fought against Ling Tian City's number 3 genius, Ling Xiaodao, before, so he was not unfamiliar with Ling Tian City. Xu Tianliang isn't here. How strange. Zhuo Wen narrowed his eyes as he stared at the bald young man, and his gaze became cold and merciless. Back then, Xu Tianliang had targeted him at every turn, and the Marquis of Baichuan, Xu Chang, had even shamelessly pressured and threatened him. As such, Zhuo Wen deeply detested the Marquis of Baichuan's residence. "Oh, looks like you're planning to take action," Xiao He suddenly said with a smile. "Since they're from the Marquis of Baichuan's residence, I, Zhuo Wen, will naturally take action. If I don't kill a few more geniuses from the Marquis of Baichuan's residence, then Xu Chang will think that I'm afraid of him. Does he really think that I, Zhuo Wen, am a pushover?" Zhuo Wen grinned, and his gaze became even colder. He wanted to let Xu Chang and Xu Tianliang know that if they wanted to kill him, Zhuo Wen, they would have to pay a certain price. At this moment, in the center of the hall, Ling Wushuang held a sword in her right hand. Her originally snow-white face was now covered in a thick greenish-black fog, and it was obvious that she had been deeply poisoned. However, this woman was also quite stubborn. Even though she had been poisoned, she still stood steadily with a sword in her hand, facing the bald young man and the others without the slightest fear. The other 2 geniuses from Ling Tian City behind Ling Wushuang also had greenish-black faces. Their strength was not as strong as Ling Wushuang's, so they could not stand steadily at all. They were almost paralyzed on the ground, and their faces were filled with pain. "Xu Mutian, you're really despicable. We clearly said that we would break this restriction together, but you secretly poisoned us. Could it be that your Marquis of Baichuan's residence is a group of despicable people like you? Me. You really don't deserve to be one of the 5 superforces in the province capital." Ling Wushuang's sword-like eyebrows were tightly knitted together as she forced herself to stand up. She coldly stared at the 7 people in front of her, who had mocking expressions. Originally, the 3 geniuses from Ling Tian City were the first to discover the palace and spatial stone stele, and the bald young man and the others had only arrived later. However, due to the Marquis of Baichuan's residence's power, Ling Wushuang did not want to come into conflict with them, so he decided to work together with them to break the restriction. In the beginning, the bald young man, Xu Sutian, naturally agreed. However, when they were breaking the formation, Xu Sutian actually despicably poisoned the 3 of them, making them unable to exert any strength at all. They were basically at the mercy of Xu Sutian. Despicable? Xu Mutian shook his head and continued, "In this world, the winner takes all, the strong are respected. What we care about is the result, not the process. As long as we can kill the enemy, to me, I'll use whatever method is convenient. Just like the current me, I only need a bit of poison to kill the 3 of you, so why would I waste my strength to fight with you? He, you can only blame yourselves for being too stupid. So, after you die, be a bit smarter." Xu Mutian laughed coldly and waved his right hand as he said coldly, "Kill the 3 of them." "Yes." The 6 geniuses behind him cupped their hands respectfully, then gripped the weapons in their hands tightly as they suddenly shot towards Ling Wushuang and the others. Eerie cold light flashed through the air, forming a mournful arc it's over. Ling Wushuang gritted her teeth, her pretty face filled with despair. She had never thought that she would actually die here not long after entering the ancient era's ruins. Whoosh! Suddenly, the sound of the air being torn apart could be heard as a long cold light suddenly shot out from an inconspicuous corner of the palace. Cold light shot out, and energy swirled in the air. In just an instant, the cold light had arrived before the 6 menacing geniuses. What? The 6 menacing geniuses clearly did not expect such an unforeseen event. Their expressions changed slightly, and then they all drew the weapons in their hands and smashed them against the cold light in front of them. Clang! The sound of metal colliding rang out, and countless sparks flew in the air, dazzling and eye-catching. Following this, the 6 geniuses were shocked to find that the weapons in their hands had been shattered into powder. How is this possible? The 6 geniuses stared at the shattered weapons in their hands in shock. Their eyes were filled with disbelief. Their weapons were all high-rank spiritual treasures, but they actually shattered upon contact. What exactly was this cold light? Chapter 536. Ling Wushuang Boom. Boom. The sound of heavy objects falling to the ground slowly sounded out within the palace. The 6 geniuses from the Marquis of Baichuan's house, who were originally overbearing, were all frozen on the spot. Then, a cool breeze blew past, and they all fell to the ground, stirring up a cloud of dust. In front of the 6 of them, a bone spear that emitted a cold light was silently inserted into the ground. In this somewhat dim palace, it seemed to emit a cold light. Who? When the bald youth saw that his 6 subordinates had been instantly killed, his pupils couldn't help but constrict. He suddenly jumped on the spot, and his right hand had already taken out a large broadsword. His gaze was focused on an inconspicuous corner behind him. Just now, he had seen that the bone spear in the palace had flashed out from this corner. What made him even more shocked was that the aura emitted from the bone spear was extremely vast. This was definitely the aura of an Earth-rank soul treasure. Moreover, it wasn't just a low Earth-rank soul treasure. This was because he felt that the aura of the bone spear was even more powerful than the broadsword in his hand. One had to know that the broadsword in his hand was a genuine low Earth-rank soul treasure, and the bone spear's aura was even more powerful than his broadsword. It was at least a middle Earth-rank soul treasure. And to be able to possess such a soul treasure, one's strength was definitely comparable to the geniuses that the 5 superpowers had focused on nurturing. Adding on the fact that the bone spear had instantly killed his 6 subordinates, the bald youth was naturally extremely fearful of this person. Stomp, stomp, stomp. Clear footsteps slowly sounded out within the palace. In the bald youth's gaze, a slender figure slowly appeared. He wore a black robe, and his short hair that reached his shoulders fluttered in the wind. At the same time, the gazes of Ling Tian City's 3 great geniuses, including Ling Wushuang, were focused on this figure. They really wanted to know who had saved them in that hopeless situation. It's you. The instant the bald youth's gaze focused on this figure, his pupils constricted once again, almost to the size of a needle. An expression of shock appeared on his face. What? Are you very surprised to see me? This figure stood tall and raised his head slightly, revealing a slightly delicate and pretty face. It was Zhuowen, who had made a move at the critical moment. When Ling Wushuang and the other 2 saw Zhuowen, they were also stunned. They did not expect that the person who saved them this time was Zhuowen. They remembered that Zhuowen did not have any interactions with them. Thank you, Brother Zhuo, for your help. Ling Tian City will remember this kindness. Although Ling Wushuang was a woman, her way of doing things was no different from a man's. She didn't hesitate in the slightest. She cupped her hands towards Zhuowen, and her valiant face was filled with gratitude. Zhuowen only nodded slightly. The reason why he helped them was not because of Ling Wushuang and the other 2, but because the 7 bald young men were from the house of Marquis Baichuan. Saving them was just a matter of convenience. Ling Wushuang was also a clear-minded person. Seeing Zhuowen like this, he understood that the latter's main purpose was not to save them, but to target Marquis Baichuan and the others. Zhuowen, you're quite bold. Our house of Marquis Baichuan hasn't even looked for you, and you've delivered yourself to our doorstep. The bald young man's gaze was dark as he looked at Zhuowen with some fear. Where's Shu Tianliang? Zhuowen waved his hand and stared at the bald young man as he spoke, word by word. He. The first crown prince doesn't even need to do anything to deal with you. I, Shu Mutian, can kill you. When the time comes, I'll bring your head to the first crown prince. It'll be a great merit. The bald young man's right hand tightened around the large saber on his back as his gaze grew colder and colder. He knew that Zhuowen had undergone 3 heavenly tribulations at the peak of Zhongling Mountain. Zhuowen's strength should be at the early stage of the ultimate king realm, which was about the same as him. However, The bald young man was skilled in using poison. He believed that if he secretly used poison in a battle with Zhuowen, he could definitely kill Zhuowen. Thinking of the reward that Xu Tianliang had promised after he killed Zhuowen, the bald young man's gaze towards Zhuowen was already filled with greed. Zhuowen shook his head. Since you're so eager to die, don't blame me for being merciless. I, Zhuowen, will personally find Xu Tianliang and take his dog life. As he spoke, Zhuowen stomped his foot, and an aura that was like that of a ferocious beast from ancient times suddenly swept out. The surrounding air completely boiled, and numerous shapeless vortexes formed around Zhuowen's body. Haha. Zhuowen, you really are arrogant enough. Since you want to take the crown prince's life, you're basically… Hey! The bald young man could not help but laugh loudly at Zhuowen's shameless boasting. However, when he sensed the terrifying aura from Zhuowen, the rest of his words were stuck in his throat. He was unable to speak at all. He stared fixedly at Zhuowen as disbelief appeared on his face. At this moment, the aura emanating from Zhuowen's body actually made his body and soul tremble. He had only felt such a feeling from Xu Tianliang, but now, Zhuowen's aura wasn't any weaker than Xu Tianliang's. The peak of the ultimate king realm? The bald young man's lips trembled slightly as he finally spat out these words in a trembling voice. He looked as if he had seen a ghost. Not far away, the gazes of Ling Wushuang and the other two were also gathered on Zhuowen's body in disbelief. They clearly remembered that Zhuowen had just passed through 3 heavenly tribulations not long ago on Zhongling Mountain. How had he suddenly reached the peak of the ultimate king realm? Wasn't this speed a little too fast? Ling Wushuang and the others looked at each other as the same thought emerged in their minds. Zhuowen was really too monstrous. No wonder he could surpass Viatao on Zhongling Mountain's ranking. His potential was far beyond what they could compare to. Gulp. The bald young man could not help but gulp as he retreated slightly. He was already cursing in his heart. He could not figure out how Zhuowen had cultivated. He had actually reached the peak of the ultimate king realm in such a short amount of time. This defied all logic. You want to run? Unfortunately, it's too late to run now. Be a good boy and leave your head behind. Zhuowen's face was cold and emotionless. He suddenly took a step forward and shot out like an arrow. He instantly arrived above the bone spear that was stuck in the ground nearby. With a flick of his right hand, the bone spear immediately appeared in his palm. Run! The bald young man roared the moment Zhuowen picked up the tyrannical dragonscale bone spear. He did not hesitate to use his movement technique and flee out of the hall. He knew that he was no match for Zhuowen with his strength as an early-stage ultimate king realm cultivator. If he did not run now, he would definitely die. I've already said it. It's too late to run now. Zhuowen snorted coldly as 2 pairs of lightning wings immediately unfurled from his back. With a flap of his wings, Zhuowen turned into a streak of lightning and instantly disappeared from where he stood. In the time it took to take a breath, he had already blocked the path of the bald young man who was fleeing in panic. You! Zhuowen, just what do you want? You should know the consequences of offending the Marquis of Baichuan's estate. If you kill me, the Marquis of Baichuan's estate will not let you off, the bald young man said fearfully as he took a few steps back. Zhuowen could not be bothered to waste his breath on him. With a shake of his right hand, the tyrannical dragonscale bone spear immediately transformed into countless white spear shadows. They rained down on the bald young man like countless raindrops. A vicious light flashed through the bald young man's eyes when he saw that Zhuowen had completely ignored him. He suddenly brandished the broadsword in his right hand. Countless rays of piercingly cold light shot out, forming a shield of light in front of him. Child's play. Break for me. The shield of light that the bald young man had set up was instantly reduced to dust by the countless spear shadows. With a whoosh, the bone spear tore through the air like a meteor and instantly swept past the bald young man's neck. Spurt. Blood spurted out as a large head flew into the air. The bald young man's eyes were wide open in anger. He had died with everlasting regret. Ling Wushuang and the others were visibly moved when they saw Zhuowen deal with the 3 ultimate Emperor realm cultivators in such a straightforward manner. The three of them were not as strong as the bald young man. If Zhuowen wanted to deal with them, he would probably only need a single move to finish them off. As a result, they were nervous at this moment. They were afraid that Zhuowen would casually finish them off. Zhuowen completely ignored Ling Wushuang and the others. Instead, he directly removed the bald young man's cosmos sac. After wiping away the imprint on it, Zhuowen inspected it briefly. A trace of a smile appeared on his face. There were quite a few resources in the bald young man's cosmos sac. Although it was only a drop in the bucket when it came to increasing by Lin's strength, it was still much more abundant than the cosmos sacs he had obtained in the past. At the same time, Zhuowen did the same to the bald young man and the other 6 people's cosmos sacs. Although the resources in their cosmos sacs were much lesser, it was still meat. No matter how small a sesame seed was, it was still meat. Zhuowen did not let it go at all. Ling Wushuang and the others revealed strange expressions as they watched Zhuowen collect the cosmos sacs of the bald young man and the others like a money grubber. After cleaning up the Chenkuan bags on the bald young man and the others, Zhuowen casually tossed a few bottles of medicine to Ling Wushuang and said, "I found these things on the bald young man's body. They should be the antidote to the poison." Ling Wushuang's pretty face was full of joy as she received the medicine bottles. She hurriedly thanked Zhuowen. At the same time, Ouyang Hanxian, who was still in the passageway, was still worried about Zhuowen. In the end, he also entered the hall and saw this scene. Zhuowen gave a brief explanation. Ouyang Hanxian also nodded in understanding. However, his gaze towards Zhuowen became even more respectful. Although he had always thought that Zhuowen was very strong, he did not expect him to be so strong that even the bald young man, who was at the early stage of the Emperor realm, was instantly killed by him. After explaining, Zhuowen's gaze quickly landed on the space stone tablet in front of him. His eyes were immediately filled with a fiery passion. He wanted to see if there were any treasures left in the space stone tablet of the Falling Star sect. Brother Zhuo, the restriction on the surface of the space stone tablet is very terrifying. A 3-wheel Emperor realm cultivator cannot break it at all. I'm afraid that only a 4-wheel Emperor realm cultivator can break it. We've already tried many times in the beginning, but unfortunately, Ling Wushuang suddenly said. Crack. Chapter 537. The Herb Garden Crack. A crisp sound gradually reverberated through the entire hall. Following that, cracks actually appeared on the seemingly indestructible restriction on the surface of the spatial stele. Looking at the crack, Ling Wushuang was suddenly speechless. Her beautiful eyes shifted slightly and landed on the slender figure below the crack. Her pretty face was filled with shock. Zhuowen's expression was cold. Golden light surged from his body as strange golden veins spread across the surface of his body. They looked like golden worms crawling through his body. Still not breaking? Zhuowen's cold voice slowly reverberated through the hall. His right hand formed into a claw and viciously clawed at the restriction in front of him. Golden light shot out like a miniature sun, and a powerful force formed a ring-shaped hurricane. Boom! 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 The claw was so powerful that it practically caused the entire hall to shake violently. Then, the cracks on the surface of the restriction spread out like a spider web. In the end, it was reduced to dust. He actually broke through. Ling Wushuang opened her mouth, but in the end, she found that she didn't know what to say. Bitterness filled the corners of her mouth. She still remembered that the 3 of them, the bald youth, and the others had attacked the restriction together, but they hadn't been able to shake it at all. That was why she had deduced that only a 4-wheel Ultimate Emperor Realm cultivator could break through the restriction. However, Zhuowen was clearly only a 3-wheel Ultimate Emperor Realm cultivator, yet he had broken through the restriction so easily. Could Zhuowen be any more of a freak? At this moment, Zhuowen had undoubtedly become unfathomable in Ling Wushuang's eyes. First, he had instantly killed the bald youth and the others. Now, he had easily broken through the restriction on the spatial stele. Just how powerful was he? No wonder he dared to challenge Xu Tianliang. It turns out that Zhuowen is actually so powerful. Ling Wushuang shook her head. Her eyes were filled with complicated emotions as she thought to herself. A trace of joy appeared on Zhuowen's face after he broke through the restriction. He'd experienced the might of this restriction before, but his physical body was even more terrifying. His physical body was already comparable to a four-wheel ultimate Emperor realm cultivator, yet he'd been able to break through the restriction with ease. Taking a step forward, Zhuowen arrived in front of the Space Stone tablet. On the surface of the Space Stone tablet, there was a black vortex. Zhuowen knew that this black vortex should be the entrance to the Space Stone tablet. Brat. Let's just go in. The space inside the Space Stone tablet is very spacious. It's several hundred miles wide and can easily accommodate 1 million people. Xiao Hei's voice rang out in his mind. Hearing this, Zhuowen also nodded. Soon after, he turned his head and said to Ouyang Hanxian, "Brother Hanxian, let's go in together. There might be some treasures hidden inside. Who knows, there might be treasures that are suitable for you." Hearing this, Ouyang Hanxian's face immediately revealed a look of surprise. He hadn't expected Zhuowen to actually invite him into the Space Stone tablet. After all, it was Zhuowen who'd defeated the bald youth and broken the restriction. He hadn't done anything at all. Brother Zhuo, I didn't do anything to receive a reward. I didn't do anything at all. I'm afraid it's not very appropriate for me to go in with you, right? Although Ouyang Hanxian rather desired the treasures inside the Space Stone tablet, it was all obtained by Zhuowen. He really couldn't bring himself to do it. However, Zhuowen smiled and said, "Don't worry. Your Broken Rock City has helped me, Zhuowen, a lot. Now it's time for me to repay you. You don't have to be polite with me. Let's go in." Hearing Zhuowen's words, Ouyang Hanxian awkwardly rubbed his nose. Under the envious gazes of Ling Wushuang and the other two, he followed behind Zhuowen and entered the Space Stone tablet. This was a pitch-black space. Above the space, there were spots of light that were like stars, constantly flickering. Looking up at the sky, this scene was too beautiful to behold. Is this the interior of the Space Stone tablet? The space is quite big. Looking at the spacious surroundings, Ouyang Hanxian couldn't help but exclaim in admiration. As soon as Zhuowen entered the interior of the Space Stone tablet, he immediately instructed Xiao Hei to use her divine sense to scan the surrounding space to see if there were any other treasures. "Continue forward," Xiao Hei suddenly instructed in his mind. Hearing this, Zhuowen immediately brought Ouyang Hanxian forward. After about an incense stick's worth of time, the two of them quickly saw that there was actually a manor in front of them. Manor! Looking at the huge manor in front of them, Zhuowen and Ouyang Hanxian were stunned. They didn't expect that there would actually be such a man-made manor in the Space Stone tablet. Let's go in and take a look." After repeatedly discussing with Xiao Hei in his mind, Zhuowen immediately brought Ouyang Hanxian into the manor. The moment they entered the manor, their pupils shrank and they were stunned on the spot. This manor is actually a medicinal garden. Ouyang Hanxian opened his mouth and squeezed out these words after a long time. Within the manor, as far as the eye could see, there were stalks of spiritual herbs with overwhelming spiritual energy. Even the air was filled with a refreshing medicinal fragrance. Zhuowen was also shocked. The manor in front of them was hundreds of acres large. With such a large area, it was actually filled with spiritual herbs with overwhelming spiritual energy. Even with Zhuowen's firm will, he couldn't help but gulp. He even saw quite a few level 4 and level 5 spiritual herbs. "Brother Zhuo, now we..." Ouyang Hanxian was so excited that he was a little out of his wits. He even stuttered when he spoke. Taking a deep breath, Zhuowen calmly said, "Be careful. No one knows if there are any mechanisms in this manor." As he spoke, Zhuowen picked up a palm-sized stone from the ground and squeezed it with his right hand. With a flash of golden light, countless stones turned into a golden rain and sprinkled over the manor's hundreds of acres of medicinal garden. After waiting for a moment, there was no reaction from the medicinal garden. Zhuowen's gaze suddenly became fiery as he said, "Brother Hanxian, I'm afraid we've struck it rich this time. Take as much as you want." As soon as his voice fell, Zhuowen and Ouyang Hanxian's eyes immediately turned red. They rushed towards the surrounding medicinal garden. This was the first time they had seen so many spiritual herbs. How could they not be excited? The two of them plundered at an extremely fast speed. They split into two directions and quickly plucked stalks of spiritual herbs from the medicinal garden. Ouyang Hanxian was especially crazy. As long as it was a spiritual herb, no matter what grade it was, he would stuff it into his chenkuan bag. However, Zhuowen was much calmer. When he was plucking spiritual herbs, he couldn't stuff all of them into his chenkuan bag. Instead, he specifically selected spiritual herbs of 3rd grade and above. This manor was really too big. With hundreds of acres of spiritual herbs, they could be piled up into a small mountain. Therefore, if they were to mindlessly put all of them into his chenkuan bag, with the limited space in his chenkuan bag, it simply wouldn't be enough. After about an hour, Ouyang Hanxuan's chenkuan bag was basically filled to the brim with spiritual herbs. He only stopped when he couldn't hold any more spiritual herbs. As for Zhuowen, he was much more careful than Ouyang Hanxian. After carefully selecting and putting all of the spiritual herbs of 3rd grade and above into his chenkuan bag, he discovered that there was still some space left in his chenkuan bag. However, Zhuowen didn't put the ordinary spiritual herbs into his chenkuan bag like Ouyang Hanxian. After all, the energy of those spiritual herbs was too low. Putting them into his chenkuan bag would simply take up space. For Zhuowen, they were simply useless. Moreover, this ancient ruin wasn't limited to the Falling Star sect, so he wouldn't fill his chenkuan bag completely. Otherwise, when he found better things, it was likely that there wouldn't be enough space. I really didn't expect that there would be such a manor in this space stone tablet. The value of these spiritual herbs is probably comparable to the heritage of our Broken Rock City. It's a pity that my chenkuan bag doesn't have enough space, so I can only take away a part of it. Ouyang Hanxian looked at the many spiritual herbs around him, and his face suddenly showed a trace of pity. If his chenkuan bag wasn't full, he might really plunder all of the spiritual herbs in this manner. The value of the spiritual herbs in your chenkuan bag is already not cheap. You don't have to be greedy. Zhuowen joked with a smile. Ouyang Hanxian also smiled. Zhuowen was right. His chenkuan bag was full of various spiritual herbs, and their value was probably comparable to an earthly rank spirit treasure. For him, this was a matter of great luck. Let's go. Let's continue to see if there are any other treasures in this space. With that, the two of them once again searched the space. At the same time, Zhuowen also constantly consulted Xiao Hei to see if it had found anything. However, the result disappointed the two of them. Except for the manor just now, there were basically no treasures left in this space. The two of them even rummaged through it, but they didn't find the slightest sign of treasure. It seems that only the manor is slightly valuable in this space stele. I'm afraid that the other places have been taken away by the people of Falling Star sect. And I guess that the spiritual herbs in this manor may not have matured yet, so the people of Falling Star sect didn't touch the medicine garden. So it's convenient for us. Zhuowen said with a wry smile. Hearing this, Ouyang Hanxian nodded in agreement. Immediately, the two of them no longer wasted time in this space stele and directly went out of the space stele. In the hall outside the stele, there was no one at this time. Ling Wushuang and the other two had already left this place. Let's go. Let's go to other ruins to have a look. Maybe there will be other gains. In the hall, Zhuowen suddenly suggested. The most precious thing in Falling Star sect should be this space stele. Since the things in the space stele have been obtained by us, it's meaningless for us to stay here. Ouyang Hanxian nodded in agreement. Walking out of the tunnel, they came to the outside of the dilapidated hall of Falling Star sect. There were still some warriors scattered in the hall, constantly searching. They were probably trying their luck. Looking at those warriors, Zhuowen shook his head. He knew that even if these warriors searched for a lifetime, they would not find anything because the most precious treasure of Falling Star sect had been taken away by them. Boom! Boom! Suddenly, the entire historical remnant violently trembled, and then a massive figure of light appeared in the sky. This figure of light had a pair of wings on its back, and its face was filled with a holy expression. Waves of aura flowed out from it, and it was extremely powerful. This is Chapter 538. The birth of the inheritance key. When the gigantic shadow appeared in the sky, all the warriors in the ruins raised their heads to look at the sky. Their faces were filled with shock. The first legacy key has appeared. I wonder who obtained it. Ouyang Hanchuan's expression was somewhat complicated as he looked at the gigantic light figure. He was very clear about the significance of this phenomenon. Only when one of the inheritance keys hidden within the ancient ruins was obtained by someone would such a phenomenon appear. Brother Zhuo, let's go over and take a look. That shadow isn't far from us, so it should be able to arrive soon. Ouyang Hanxian suddenly turned his head and said to Zhuowen, Yes. Let's go and take a look. Nodding their heads, Zhuowen and Ouyang Hanxian immediately turned into two streaks of black lightning and rushed towards the location of the light shadow. At the same time, the cultivators in other parts of the land of ancient ruins also had the same thoughts as Ouyang Hanxian as they rushed towards the direction of the glowing figure. There were even some cultivators with malicious intentions who were secretly preparing to snatch the inheritance key. Whoosh! Whoosh! Countless sonic booms suddenly rang out as figures rushed out from all directions. All of them rushed towards the location where the inheritance key had appeared. In an instant, black figures covered the entire space. It was quite a spectacular sight. This was a natural basin, and in the middle of the basin stood a magnificent stone statue. The stone statue was of a middle-aged man holding a sword with both hands. He had a dignified appearance, sharp eyebrows, and bright eyes. At this moment, a figure with an indifferent expression stood on the back of the giant stone statue's hand. His white robe fluttered in the wind, making him look elegant and unrestrained. When the other cultivators in the vicinity arrived at the basin, especially after seeing the figure on the stone statue, all of them were startled. Immediately, their faces revealed embarrassed expressions. This figure was none other than Muqin County's number 1 genius, LV Atao. At this moment, LV Atao was holding a key that emitted a dazzling white light. Clearly, that was the so-called legacy key. I never thought that the first key would be obtained by LV Atao. It seems that we don't have a chance. Yeah. LV Atao is too strong. Competing with him is simply courting death. After seeing LV Atao on the stone statue, the other cultivators who hurried over cursed in a low voice. Then, they all left this place and continued to search for the inheritance key in the other ruins. At this moment, Zhuowen and Ouyang Hanxian had also arrived at the vicinity of the basin. Looking at the white-clothed youth standing on the stone statue, the two of them shook their heads and secretly praised LV Atao's luck in their hearts. He had actually obtained the first inheritance key. On the stone statue, LV Atao seemed to have sensed something. His gaze shifted slightly and he immediately noticed Zhuowen outside the basin. Nodding slightly at Zhuowen, LV Atao took a step forward and turned into a stream of light that shot into the distance. Clearly, he was planning to head to the land of inheritance. Let's go too. Looking deeply at LV Atao's departing figure, Zhuowen called out to Ouyang Hanxian and also left the basin. As time passed, one inheritance key after another appeared. Among them, Luo Xing from the Jade Maiden Star Court obtained one, Zhu Kai from the Imperial Sword Sect also obtained one, Qin Batian from the Marquis residence also obtained one, and Xu Tianliang also obtained one. These 4 people were the 5 great geniuses. Although many people's eyes were filled with greed and hope, no one dared to snatch the inheritance keys from the hands of these 4 people. They didn't want to die. Apart from the 5 great geniuses who obtained their respective inheritance keys, 3 other keys were obtained by 3 geniuses from other supercities, including Ling Tian City's Ling Wushuang. These 3 people were extremely clever. They all knew that their strength and prestige were no match for the 5 super geniuses, so after obtaining the inheritance key, they immediately fled as fast as they could, avoiding the encirclement of the surrounding cultivators. On the other hand, Zhuo Wen and Ouyang Hanchuan's luck was extremely bad. They had rummaged through many ancient remains. Although they had obtained quite a number of resources, they were unable to obtain the inheritance key. This caused the 2 of them to be rather anxious. 8 inheritance keys have already appeared. Now, there are only 2 keys left. If someone else gets it first, Brother Zhuo, won't you? Ouyang Hanxian was also somewhat anxious for Zhuowen. He was very clear about Zhuowen's strength. He was completely comparable to the 5 great geniuses. If he obtained the inheritance key, it was very likely that he would obtain an ancient inheritance. However, it was a pity that the heavens did not fulfill their wishes. The two of them had searched so hard, but they still did not have the slightest clue about the inheritance key. This made the two of them somewhat disappointed. Boom! Suddenly, another huge light shadow rose up not far from Zhuo Wen and Ouyang Hanxian. It was like a small sun. The 9th inheritance key has appeared. Brother Zhuo, that place is not far from us. Let's go over and take a look. Perhaps we can snatch it. Ouyang Hanxian's face immediately revealed a trace of joy. Zhuowen's eyes also revealed a trace of light. He was determined to obtain the inheritance key. This time, even if he had to snatch it, he would obtain one. Otherwise, he would not even be able to enter the inheritance land. Let's go. The two of them immediately turned into 2 streams of light and rushed towards the light shadow not far away. At this time, the light shadow was located in the ruins of a rather abandoned hall. In the center of the ruins, several figures were constantly flashing and fighting. The sound of metal clashing could be heard incessantly. Because Zhuowen was the closest to this place, when he arrived, there were not many people here. However, he knew that if he waited for a long time, the other warriors would probably arrive. At that time, it would be extremely difficult to snatch the inheritance key from dozens of people. Therefore, this time, Zhuowen had to act quickly. As far as his eyes could see, Zhuowen immediately saw that there were 3 men and 1 woman fighting in the center of the ruins of the hall. The 3 men's auras were surging violently. They should be around the mid-stage of the ultimate king realm. At this time, the 3 men were jointly attacking the woman in the center. When Zhuowen's gaze fell on the besieged woman, he could not help but be startled. This was because the besieged woman was none other than Qing Lian of the Jade Lady Astral Court. Qing Lian's strength was at the mid-stage of the ultimate king realm. Under the attacks of 3 warriors of the same level, she was in imminent danger. Fortunately, she had a very powerful defensive spirit treasure on her. Facing the attacks of the 3 people, she was barely able to withstand the attacks of the 3. Qing Lian, since you are a genius of the Jade Lady Astral Court, hand over the inheritance key now and we will immediately let you go. Otherwise, don't blame us for being impolite. Among the 3 men, a young man with a hooked nose and a sinister appearance said coldly, "You people of the Imperial Sword School, don't go too far. I clearly found this inheritance key first. You are really damaging the reputation of the Imperial Sword School by taking it by force." Qing Lian clenched her silver teeth and ignored the threat of the hook-nosed man. Good, good. Since you want to die so much, don't blame us for bullying you with numbers. Formation, tripartite sword formation. The hook-nosed man sneered. Suddenly, the long swords in their hands turned into strange marks in the void. Then, waves of sword chi burst out from the 3 of them. Immediately, the 3 of them stood in 3 different directions around Qing Lian. Suddenly, countless sword shadows rushed out from the 3 directions. Like a rainstorm, they enveloped Qing Lian in the center. Feeling the terrifying sword shadows around her, Qing Lian's pretty face finally changed. She waved the light blue long sword in her hand and shouted, "Sword Lotus, 4 directions." As she spoke, a water blue sword chi protected Qing Lian in the center, forming a blue water lotus. Qing Lian seemed to have become the lotus seed of the water lotus. Boom! Boom! An earth-shattering explosion resounded as countless sword shadows frantically smashed onto the water lotus. The powerful impact immediately caused Qing Lian to let out a muffled groan as blood seeped out from her cherry lips. Break! The hook-nosed man shouted. The surrounding sword shadows suddenly turned into a hurricane. They rotated counterclockwise and bombarded the water lotus. With a crack, the water lotus shattered into countless blue fragments. It's over. Qing Lian spat out a mouthful of blood when the water lotus was broken. Her face was as pale as snow. Her eyes reflected the approaching sword shadows and her face was filled with despair. However, just as she was about to give up, A slender voice suddenly appeared in her eyes. The figure stood with a spear in his hand. With a gentle wave of his right hand, the surrounding sword shadows instantly vanished. "Qing Lian, are you all right?" A clear voice gradually sounded and a familiar smiling face slowly appeared in Qing Lian's eyes. At this moment, this face remained in Qing Lian's mind for a long time without disappearing. I. Qing Lian's cherry lips parted. Suddenly, a smile bloomed on her pretty face. The man in front of her had saved her once again. At this moment, Qing Lian felt her heartbeat quicken. "You're Zhuowen?" Once the sword shadows were broken, the hook-nosed man and the other two stared at the young man in front of them with a gloomy expression. Their eyes were filled with fear. "I'll give you 3 breaths of time." Scram. Slowly turning around, Zhuowen's eyes were filled with calmness. He didn't take the 3 of them seriously at all. However, he did have the right to do so. After all, the 3 of them were only at the mid-stage of the second wheel. Zhuowen didn't even need to use his trump cards to defeat them. "How dare you?" "Zhuowen, we know that you've already advanced to the 3rd wheel of the Ultimate Emperor stage. However, the 3 of us aren't necessarily a match for you even if we work together. It's best if you don't offend the ruling sword order." The hook-nosed man's eyes grew even darker as he spoke coldly. 3 breaths of time is up. Since you won't leave, I'll have to make you suffer." Shaking his head, Zhuowen didn't want to waste any more time with the 3 of them. After all, more and more people would gather here in a moment. When that time came, all sorts of crooks would be mixed in with the honest folk. Their situation wouldn't be too good. Getting rid of the 3 of them as soon as possible was the right thing to do. Swish. Zhuowen stomped his foot. His entire body was like a bolt of black lightning as he arrived before the 3 of them in an instant. Following that, he swung the bone spear in his hand. With a force that tore through the air, it slammed into the 3 of them. "I'm afraid it won't be that easy to defeat us. Form the tripartite sword formation." The hook-nosed man growled. The 3 of them formed the formation once again. They swung their swords and the sword shadows transformed into a violent storm that blasted towards Zhuowen. You're tuning in to the Celestial War YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.